Welcome to Eerie Shadow.
My name is Jamie. I'm almost 11. I live in a quiet little house in a suburb where everyone knows each other, and the streets get so still at night you can hear your own breath. Most nights, I fall asleep without trouble. But sometimes, when the house is too quiet, I feel like the shadows in my room get bigger, like they're watching. Tonight, the streetlight outside my window flickers through the half-closed curtains, casting soft stripes across my bed. My toys are scattered on the floor, the books piled unevenly on my nightstand. The air smells like my mom's laundry detergent mixed with the faint, dusty scent of the old carpet. My nightlight hums quietly beside me, barely enough to chase away the dark. I've been having trouble sleeping ever since I heard those whispers coming from the attic a few nights ago. I thought maybe it was the wind or the house settling, but now I'm not so sure. I'm alone in my room, or at least I thought I was. It started a few minutes ago when I was almost asleep. At first, it was just a faint noise, like someone breathing softly right beneath me. I told myself it was just my imagination. The house always makes weird noises at night, but then the breathing got louder. Slow, wet inhales and exhales, like someone was there just under my bed. I didn't want to look. My heart hammered so loud I thought the walls might hear it. I pulled my blankets tighter, gripping the rough sheets with cold fingers. The floorboards creaked outside my room. A soft, scratching noise began, like nails dragging against wood. My ankles felt a cold brush, like icy fingers barely touching my skin. I froze, trying to breathe slow and quiet. The shadows from my nightlight flickered against the wall. Something seemed to move just under the bed frame, a shape too dark to see clearly. I blinked, and it was gone. I wanted to call my mom, but my voice caught in my throat. Then the breathing changed. It became deeper, wetter, heavier, like it was right beneath me, pressing up against the floorboards. I could feel a vibration. My whole body trembled. The musty smell came up stronger now, like damp earth, forgotten dust, and something old and rotten. I slowly slid my hand off the bed, my skin prickling from the cold. My fingers touched the floor, rough, dusty, alive with movement. I gathered every bit of courage I had and peeked under the bed. At first, nothing, just darkness, just old shoes and forgotten toys. But then I heard it again. Right behind me in the dark, a wet, slow breath, closer, and then a whisper, not mine. It said, "Jamie." My breath caught. I wanted to scream but couldn't. The air felt thick and heavy. I pulled back, heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst through my chest. I jumped onto my bed and pulled the blankets over my head, trembling. The breathing stopped. The scratching stopped. Everything was silent again, except for the tick-tock of the wall clock. Minutes passed. I didn't move. Then, a faint sound, footsteps, not from my room but the hallway. I listened, frozen. A soft voice whispered, "Jamie." I didn't dare peek. Suddenly, the door creaked open and my mom stepped in, her face pale. "Jamie, did you hear that too?" I blinked at her, relief flooding in, but also a new fear. It started on a Tuesday, the kind of dull Tuesday that feels like it's been dragging on forever, even before the morning coffee hits your system. The office was buzzing, but that day, in my little cubicle on the 5th floor, something felt off. The usual hum of keyboards, phone rings, and distant chatter seemed to warp into a low, sibilant whisper. a whisper that wasn't coming from my coworkers, but from the walls themselves. My name is Jessa. I work in data entry, and I've always liked the routine, numbers, spreadsheets, the comforting monotony that made the world outside feel manageable. Except now, the walls around me started to talk. At first, I thought it was fatigue, maybe stress, or just the isolating nature of cubicle life. But it wasn't in my head. It began with faint murmurs, impossible to ignore once you notice them. Low voices leaking through the thin drywall, voices that whispered secrets I wasn't supposed to hear. Secrets about Leo, my coworker in the next cubicle, the way he pretended to be friendly but was backstabbing others. Secrets about the boss, the HR lady, even the quiet girl from accounting. I remember the first time I heard my own name, dragged into those conversations like a dark thread, weaving through the mundane fabric of office life. It was chilling, like the walls knew more than they should, like the building itself was alive and feeding on the hidden ugliness buried beneath polite smiles. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was imagining things. But the voices grew louder, clearer, more desperate. And they started talking about me. At lunch, I confided in Leo, hoping for some rational explanation, some shared experience. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You're stressed, Jessa. Maybe talk to someone," he said, shaking his head, then returning to his salad, as if my words were just white noise. That dismissal stung. I felt alone, trapped in a cubicle maze where walls whispered betrayal, and I couldn't trust my own senses. Days bled into nights. The office emptied, the lights dimmed, but the voices never stopped. Sometimes, when I thought I was alone, I'd catch the faintest rustle behind the partitions, as if something or someone was watching. One night, I swear I saw my own reflection in the glass partition move without me. It smiled when I didn't. The atmosphere around me thickened, like the air was saturated with dread. The faint scent of mildew mixed with stale coffee clung to everything. My skin prickled constantly, a cold draft that no air conditioning could explain. I started keeping a journal, writing down every whisper, every secret the walls revealed. It was a cruel game. Every time I thought I had unraveled one dark truth, the voices twisted it into something worse. My grip on reality loosened. Was I going mad, or was the office itself a trap? A living entity feeding on paranoia and betrayal. One evening, desperate, I confronted the wall, pressing my ear hard against the cold panel. The voices swirled, overlapping, a chaotic flood of confessions and lies. "Trust no one," they hissed. "Your reflection is not yours. Leo is not who he seems." My heart pounded. The voice I heard next was chillingly calm, almost affectionate. "Jessa, you don't belong here." That's when I realized this nightmare wasn't just about coworkers or secrets. It was about me. My fears, my doubts, my fractured mind trapped in a glass box. I need to stop. I need to escape. But how do you run from the voice inside your own head? From the reflection that doesn't mirror your soul? The next morning, I arrived at the office feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My eyes were heavy, dark circles pressed deep under the surface, the kind of exhaustion that no amount of caffeine could fix. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow that made the walls look even more oppressive. The familiar clacking of keyboards felt sharper, almost aggressive, as if the entire room was grinding against me. I tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to my skin like damp clothes after a rainstorm. At my desk, a new email waited in my inbox. The subject line was blank, and the sender was anonymous. I hesitated before opening it, heart fluttering with a mix of dread and curiosity. Inside was a short message. "Stop listening. You're hearing what you want." I stared at the screen, the words blurring for a moment. It felt like a joke, some sick prank from a coworker. But the timing, the message hit too close to home. I looked around, half expecting to see someone smirking behind their monitor. Leo was nowhere in sight, and most of the office felt unusually quiet for a mid-morning rush. My phone buzzed, a text from my sister. "You okay? You sounded off last night." I hadn't told anyone about the voices. How could I? Who would believe me? The fear wasn't just about the whispers, it was the sinking loneliness that came with keeping such a secret. I typed back, "Just tired. Work's been rough." That day, I found myself watching Leo more closely. He was polite, maybe even friendly, but there was something in the way his eyes darted just a little too quickly, like he was hiding something. Maybe it was paranoia, stress playing tricks on me, but I caught him whispering into his phone and shooting glances in my direction. At lunch, I ate alone at my desk, headphones plugged in, hoping music could drown out the murmurs. But beneath the pop songs and hum of other employees' conversations, I still heard it. The walls, soft, urgent, dragging words out of shadows. I tapped my pen nervously, eyes flicking to the glass partitions around my cubicle. They reflected the rows of desks, the flickering screens, the dull faces buried in their work. But sometimes, just for a second, a face that looked too tired, too hollow, stared back at me. That evening, when the office was nearly empty, I lingered at my desk, reluctant to go home. The walk back to my apartment felt long and isolating, the city's noise muffled by my own spiraling thoughts. I kept replaying everything, the whispers, the email, Leo's strange behavior. Was I just unraveling from too much stress? Or was there something else? Something deeper, lurking beneath the fluorescent buzz and beige cubicles? I remembered the HR pamphlet we got during orientation. If you feel overwhelmed, reach out. You're not alone. But how do you reach out when the thing tormenting you is invisible? When your own mind feels like the enemy? That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of my apartment felt amplified, every shadow a shape waiting to crawl out. I stared at the ceiling, thoughts looping endlessly. The voice from the walls was inside me now, whispering doubts and secrets no one else knew. I knew I had to figure out what was real and what was the product of my fraying mind, because if I couldn't trust my own senses, how could I trust anything? The following days blurred into one another. A monotony of endless meetings, the dull hum of printers, and the mechanical tapping of keyboards that echoed like a relentless metronome, counting down my sanity. Each morning, I dragged myself into the cubicle maze, a sea of beige walls and flickering monitors that seemed to close in tighter with every passing hour. Leo kept his distance, but sometimes I caught him watching me from across the room, his eyes sharp, unreadable. I wondered if he knew something I didn't, or if I was just inventing shadows to chase in the dull light. The whispers were there again, quiet at first, like the soft rustling of papers or the distant buzz of the ventilation system. But they grew louder, sharper, spilling dark secrets about my coworkers, secrets no one should know. They murmured about stolen ideas, whispered betrayals, petty lies that twisted familiar faces into strangers I no longer trusted. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, the stress seeping into my mind, but the more I resisted, the more insistent they became. During one late afternoon, as the sun slipped behind the city skyline, the office emptied until only a handful remained. I sat alone in my cubicle, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, casting long shadows that slithered across the walls. The voice came again, but this time clearer, closer. "Look at yourself." I froze, heart hammering in my chest, and slowly turned to the glass wall beside my desk, my reflection staring back, but distorted, eyes darker, lips twitching into a sneer I hadn't made. For a moment, it felt like the reflection was watching me, not the other way around. I blinked and it was gone, just me again, tired and trembling. Sleep became a stranger. I'd lie awake for hours, replaying conversations and memories, second-guessing everything. Was I hearing real voices, or was my mind fracturing under the pressure? The line between nightmare and reality blurred until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. At work, I started skipping lunches, avoiding the few coworkers I still felt close to. My isolation grew, the cubicle walls feeling less like protection and more like a cage. Even my reflection betrayed me. Every glance in the bathroom mirror felt like a challenge, a reminder that something was wrong. One afternoon, I found a note slipped under my keyboard. No handwriting, just a message typed on a scrap of office paper. "Stop looking." I shoved it into my drawer, but the dread stuck around, thick and suffocating. The last straw came during a team meeting. I was halfway through a presentation when a chilling whisper slipped through the white noise. A voice I knew too well, low and cruel, saying my name. My pulse thundered in my ears as I scanned the room, but no one looked up. Everyone was perfectly normal, chatting, nodding, unaware. I wanted to scream, to run, but the walls seemed to close in, and my own reflection caught my eye from the glass panel behind the conference table, grinning that same twisted smile again. I realized then I wasn't just losing my mind. Something was in that office with me, weaving itself into the fabric of everyday life, feeding on fear and isolation. And I didn't know how to fight it, or if I could. Desperation settled over me like a second skin. I couldn't keep living like this, haunted by voices no one else heard, trapped in a cubicle prison that had become a psychological battleground. I decided to take action, to fight back against the creeping madness threatening to swallow me whole. First, I confided in Leo. It wasn't easy. My voice trembled as I told him about the whispers, the notes, the reflection that wasn't quite mine. His eyes softened, but there was a flicker of worry too, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "You're not alone," he said quietly, glancing around the near-empty office. "I've noticed strange things too. It's like the place messes with your head." Relief and fear tangled inside me. If he felt it too, maybe it wasn't just in my mind. But then, what was it? We started watching each other's backs, swapping stories about odd noises, flickering lights, coworkers acting strangely distant. The office, once dull and lifeless, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows and half-truths. Determined to find answers, I researched the building's history. Turns out, the company had taken over an old government office, rumored to have been a site for psychological experiments during the Cold War. The walls, some said, still held echoes of fear and manipulation. Armed with that, I began grounding myself in reality, writing down everything, setting alarms, forcing breaks. I avoided mirrors whenever possible, though the dread never fully lifted when I caught my reflection's quick, unfamiliar smirk. One evening, after a long day, I caught myself speaking aloud in the dark cubicle, a mantra against the voices. "This is real. This is me. You don't control me." Slowly, the whispers softened. The reflection's grin faded. It wasn't a victory, but a fragile truce. I knew the fight wasn't over. The office, the building itself, held something sinister, feeding on isolation and fear. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of hope. Over the following weeks, I forced myself to step back from the spiral. I started small, taking regular breaks away from my desk, going outside for fresh air, even avoiding the cubicle's corner near the cracked wall where the whispers seemed loudest. I talked to Leo more, sharing how drained and anxious I felt. He encouraged me to see a therapist, something I'd pushed aside for too long. The voices didn't vanish overnight. Some days, they still crept in, quiet murmurs, fleeting shadows at the edge of my vision. But I learned to recognize them as symptoms of my own exhaustion and stress. The office, with its sterile fluorescent lights and endless hum of computers, had become a pressure cooker, and my mind was reacting to that pressure in ways I hadn't expected. Eventually, I started therapy. It helped me untangle the threads of anxiety and fatigue that had twisted my perception. The reflection that once seemed sinister became just a tired face. The notes just scribbles I'd written in moments of distraction. The building's history was unsettling, but I realized the real nightmare was how the monotony, isolation, and stress had invaded my mind. I couldn't change the walls around me, but I could change how I lived within them. I didn't have dramatic confrontations with mysterious forces. No sudden breakthroughs or terrifying revelations. Just slow days of reclaiming sanity piece by piece. And that, I think, is scarier. The quiet erosion of the mind. The way ordinary life can push someone to the edge without warning. I should have noticed sooner, maybe when Whiskers first froze mid-stride, ears flat, eyes locked on nothing. His tail twitched, low and tense, but life was busy. Work calls, deadlines, a friend's betrayal. It wasn't till I stepped off the bus that afternoon and saw him crouched by the hallway wall that I realized he'd never looked at me that way before. Whiskers, I crouched to stroke him. His fur was unusually bristled. He didn't purr, he just stared. Wide eyes tracking something behind me, I spun, heart thudding. Nothing. Hallway empty, silent except for the low hum of the fridge. I shook my head, probably exhaustion. I planted a kiss on his head. "You're silly, buddy." He blinked slowly before slinking past me, and for one split second, I thought the air behind me rippled, like skin above a still pond. The next morning, I met Claire at the cafe on 3rd, the one with the squeaky screen door and burnt coffee smell that never quite left the air. The chairs were too light, the table wobbled, and the sun spilled in through streaked glass, trying its best to make everything feel normal. Claire looked tired in a familiar way, like someone pretending they weren't. She stirred her latte with slow circles, eyes fixed on the foam like it could offer answers. "I think something's wrong with Whiskers," I said, my voice barely above the clink of her spoon. She raised an eyebrow. "Like sick?" "No, weird," I hesitated. "He just stares at nothing. Like someone's behind me." Claire let out a soft, breathy laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. "He's just being weird," she said, almost rehearsed. "Did anything change? Visitors? Strange noises?" I shook my head slowly. "Nah, apartment's the same." I paused, the words catching like something dry in my throat. "I feel watched. Like, not all the time, but when it's quiet. It's like someone's holding their breath right behind me." Claire blinked, her hand reaching over to touch mine. Her fingers were cool, steady, real. Maybe it's stress, Sabrina. You haven't had a weekend off in what, 6 months? Take some time, get out of your head. I nodded, managing a thin smile. But even as we sipped our coffee and the world hummed around us, murmurs of people, the distant sound of a bus groaning to a stop, I felt it again. That same pressure, that same prickling between my shoulder blades. By the time I was back at my desk, the cityscape dimming through my window, I had convinced myself it was nothing. Just nerves. Just a stray, anxious thought gone sticky. But when I turned my head, Whiskers was there, bunched against the wall in the corner of my room, like he was trying to melt into it. His body was rigid, his fur bristled unnaturally, and his wide, glassy eyes were locked on that same patch of nothing just above the baseboard. Then his head began to twist slowly, too slowly, until it looked like it was about to snap off his little body. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. And then he hissed, low, guttural, primal, not the kind of hiss cats give when they are annoyed. The kind they make when they're trying to warn you that something is very, very wrong. The kind they make when something is already inside the room. I turned around in one terrified motion. Nothing. No movement, no sound, just the faint hum of my monitor and the soft tick of the wall clock. But for a split second, no longer than a blink, the hallway light behind me flickered, not like it was broken, like something passed through it. Like the edge of a shadow had moved just out of frame. And I swear the color of the air shifted, not darker, not lighter, just wrong. Like gray smudged into a frame of reality that was supposed to be clean. I swallowed hard, staring into that patch of hallway, willing it to just be a hallway. Whiskers let out another hiss, then bolted from the room without looking at me once, and I realized I hadn't moved in almost a full minute. That evening, I came home with groceries, and a knot of stress tangled beneath my shoulder blades. It had been there all day, this tight, electric buzz, like the static hum of a TV left on in another room. I told myself it was just work, or too much caffeine, or maybe the half-forgotten dream I'd woken from with clenched fists and no memory. But the moment I stepped through the door, it deepened. The hallway was too quiet, wrong quiet. Like the walls were holding their breath. No distant car horns, no humming from the neighbor's TV. Just an oppressive stillness that made every step feel too loud. Whiskers was waiting. Perched motionless on the arm of the couch, his gray fur puffed slightly, tail coiled so tightly around his feet it looked like it might cut off his circulation. His eyes didn't shift when I came in, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge me. Instead, they stayed locked on something behind me, toward the far corner of the living room, the one with the old baseboard vent. There were a few dry leaves scattered there. I hadn't noticed them before, brown, curled at the edges, like they'd been blown in through a window I hadn't opened. I slowly set the groceries down, the rustle of plastic sounding obscene in the quiet. Whiskers, I said softly. He didn't move, didn't even flick an ear. His body was taut as wire, his breath coming shallow through his nose, and his gaze was frozen, pinned to the dark corner like gravity itself had increased there. I turned slowly. The vent hadn't been cleaned in ages. I could see the edges of dust-caked metal, and the way the leaves seemed to gather around it, not blown, not randomly, but almost drawn. My ears strained, nothing, no creaks, no wind, no settling of the old apartment, just a low hiss from behind me. Whiskers. I spun back and saw him still staring, his body low now, his belly close to the cushion, hackles up. He hissed again, louder this time. Warning, not annoyance. "Okay," I whispered, trying to steady my breathing. My hands trembled as I stepped toward the vent. Something in me screamed not to, but the silence demanded an answer. The tension in the air felt like a scream held underwater, and the moment I got close, just 3 steps away, I felt it. The air changed, thicker, heavier. It was like walking into syrup, each inch harder to push through. My throat constricted, my limbs slowed. It was viscous in there. Wrong. I reached out a shaking hand and brushed my fingertips along the carpet near the vent. It moved, it rippled, like the surface of a still pond disturbed by breath. I yanked my hand back with a choked gasp, heart slamming against my ribs like it wanted out. The moment my fingers left the floor, Whiskers bolted from the couch, launched like a missile, his claws tearing through the rug, a guttural yowl erupting from deep in his chest. His fur stood on end, back arched in full terror. He didn't run past me. He ran around me, avoided the air I had just touched like it would burn him. And in that moment, I felt it too, a shift in pressure. A soundless scream in the silence, not from outside, but from beneath, from behind the vent. Like something had opened one eye, sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. Not because I didn't try. I did. God, I tried. But every time I let my eyes drift shut, just as that fragile veil of unconsciousness began to settle, I heard it, scratching, faint at first. Soft and wet, like fingernails sliding through damp insulation. It came from behind the walls, from under the floorboards, sometimes from inside the air vents. Not the dry creak of an old building. This was different. It sounded desperate. Like something trapped was trying to dig its way out or in. And then I'd wake, suddenly, gasping, sweating, and there he'd be, Whiskers perched on my chest, unmoving. His small body tense, his breath coming fast, Whiskers twitching with each exhale. His pupils were dilated wide, black coins swallowing the green, and he wasn't looking at me. He was looking behind me, always behind me. And I never turned my head to see what he saw. The thought of it made my throat tighten, my body go rigid. It was like some primal warning system in my brain had tripped. Don't look. You won't survive it, so I just lay there, frozen, listening to my cat breathe in syncopation with my racing heart, feeling the air grow colder around me, like something enjoyed my fear. Work fell apart fast. My fingers shook too much to type. I spilled coffee on my keyboard twice. Missed calls, deadlines, entire Zoom meetings I didn't remember scheduling. My manager left a voicemail saying I looked pale, distracted. She was worried. I couldn't tell her that the real problem was that my reflection in my computer monitor had started to move just a little too slow. Not always, but once or twice a day, I'd blink and notice. The reflection was still staring, still moving, like it was playing catch-up. Like it wasn't quite me anymore. I told myself it was anxiety, lack of sleep, dehydration, a warped monitor, optical illusions, but nothing helped, not the water, not the sleeping pills. Not even the stress balls I'd compulsively squeeze until my fingers went numb. And deep down, there was something else gnawing at me. A thought I didn't want to face but couldn't shake. Maybe it was guilt. Claire had come by a week before it all got worse. I told her about the noises, about Whiskers, about how it felt like something was following me inside my own apartment. She laughed at first, tried to reason with me, but I could see the way her expression shifted when she watched Whiskers' paw at the hallway wall, his tiny mouth open in a silent meow, his stare following something that wasn't there. We argued. Heavily, I accused her of not taking me seriously. She accused me of needing help. We both said things we didn't mean. Or maybe we did. Either way, she left. Shaken, she hasn't come back since. No texts, no calls. And I blamed myself, still do. Maybe that's what opened the door. Maybe guilt isn't just emotional. Maybe it's chemical, like a key. A scent. Something that calls out across thresholds to the things that live in places we're not supposed to see. Maybe something heard my guilt, smelled it, and now it won't leave. Maybe it moved in. On Tuesday, just as twilight turned the windows into dark mirrors, a knock came at the door. A single knock, sharp, measured, too deliberate to be accidental. I froze mid-step, my grocery bag still on the counter, one orange slowly rolling across the tile. My breath hitched. My pulse stuttered. No one I knew would show up unannounced. Not after everything with Claire. Not after the last few days of avoiding calls, ignoring texts, pretending everything was fine when nothing was. The silence on the other side of the door stretched, tense and waiting, like it was listening for my reaction. I stepped closer. Slowly. Bare feet whispering against the wood floor. Another knock never came. Just the faint hum of the hallway's fluorescent light buzzing beyond the peephole. I opened the door. No one stood there. Just the stairwell awash in a jaundiced yellow glow. The bulb overhead flickering as if someone had just passed beneath it. The air smelled wrong, a subtle twist in the usual stale hallway scent, like damp wool and something old, something sour. And then Whiskers bolted. Like a bullet of fur and panic, he shot out from behind my legs, every hair on his back standing at attention, tail straight and quivering. His paws skittered across the tile as he tore down the hallway, a low, guttural growl trailing behind him like smoke. "Whiskers," I yelled, instantly running after him, heart hammering in my throat. My breath was short, fast, scraping my lungs like sandpaper down one flight, then another. My soles slapped the concrete steps. Whiskers was just ahead, rounding the corner of the second-floor landing like he knew where he was going. But when I reached the bottom, nothing. The corridor stretched in both directions, dim and dead. Whiskers was gone, no sound, no movement. Just a motionless lobby drowning in late-night silence. The kind that buzzes behind your ears and makes your skin prickle with the sense that something knows you're there. The night desk clerk, a man maybe in his late 60s with heavy-lidded eyes and a wool cardigan that looked slept in, looked up as I stumbled to the front. He blinked once, slowly, like he'd been expecting me, or like I'd interrupted a dream. "Miss Morales," he said gently. I blinked, confused. I'd never given him my name. Yeah, I stammered, panting. My cat ran out. Did you see him?" The man shook his head, something unreadable shadowing his features. Then he added, in a tone flat and final, "You pulled in a full 3 hours ago." I stared at him. "What?" "No one came in after you." His eyes didn't flinch, didn't question. As if he'd rehearsed the line, I swallowed the knot rising in my throat. My ears buzzed. But there was a knock. Someone, he simply looked at me with a quiet, tired sadness, as if he already knew where this was heading. And in that moment, the cold, aching truth settled in my spine. The building knew, everyone in it, every wall, every hallway, every lock and light bulb, they knew something had come in. But they all insisted. No one had. That night, the rain hit my windows like restless fingers, soft at first, then more urgent, more demanding. I turned off every light except the desk lamp, its dull glow barely pushing back the darkness. My laptop screen bathed my face in pale blue as I scrolled, heart heavy and mind brittle. I wasn't searching for answers anymore. I was hunting patterns, The building Laurel Oaks, 10 years old on paper, but the bones were older. I could feel it. Something about the layout, the way the elevators always arrived too fast or too slow. How the light in the hallway outside my unit clicked on 3 seconds before I stepped out. There were whispers, literal and digital. Posts on forgotten forums, deleted rental reviews cached in archived corners of the web. Phrases kept repeating, woke up to scratching. My cat stopped eating and stared at the wall for hours. Moved out, don't ask. And the one that sent ice crawling under my skin, you'll know it's time to leave when your pet starts listening instead of watching. Tenant histories showed people leaving mid-lease, breaking contracts, forfeiting deposits without explanation. Some just disappeared, no forwarding addresses. No complaints filed. I clicked through names. Scrolled floor plans, Unit 4B. Mine, 4 previous tenants in 3 years, all had pets, all gone in under 6 months, and every single one had stopped responding to maintenance requests before they left, as if the building had absorbed them. My stomach turned. The air in the apartment grew dense, like it was inhaling and holding it. My skin buzzed with static behind me. I heard a soft shift of fur, whiskers. He sat by the doorway, eyes bright with something ancient. He didn't blink, didn't even twitch. His body was low to the ground, ears flattened, not afraid but tense, watching, but not me, the wall, that corner again. The one by the baseboard vent with the dry leaves no breeze could explain. I swallowed hard. This wasn't stress. It wasn't overwork. It wasn't grief or guilt. I knew what denial felt like. This wasn't it. Whiskers wasn't broken. He was the only one who knew, and more than that, he'd tolerated it, whatever it was. For me, he hadn't been afraid until now. He'd been warning me. A soft crack came from behind the wall, like nails on old wood. I stared at the corner. The carpet there looked different in the lamplight. Slightly raised, like the floor was breathing beneath it. 2 nights later, 3:00 a.m., I awoke to a sound that didn't belong. Knock. Knock, not on the door. Not from above. Knock. Knock. It came from my bedroom wall. Not frantic, not random, rhythmic, measured. As if whatever was behind it knew I was awake. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, my chest tightened. Whiskers was perched at the base of the wall, his tail swishing like a metronome stuck on dread. He raised a paw and knocked again, deliberately, like he was mimicking it, calling it out. 1, 2, I didn't speak. I didn't move right away. Just listened. The darkness of my room was thick and unmoving, but the air felt aware. The kind of silence that feels like it's watching you back. I finally slid from the bed, every muscle taut with terror. The floor was cold beneath my feet, grounding, reminding me I was still here. Still real. I crawled forward on shaking hands and knees, heart pounding like it was trying to warn me. The wood beneath me creaked louder than it should have, as if complaining. I pressed my ear to the wall, and I heard it scratch, 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 scratch. Not mice, not pipes. This was intentional. Soft, deliberate, like someone writing with fingernails, with something dull. Words being etched just beneath the surface. I scanned the floor in front of me, and then I saw it. One of the floorboards sat just slightly askew. A hairline gap I'd never noticed before. It practically begged me to open it. I pried it up with trembling fingers, the dry wood protesting with a groan. A pocket of air escaped, damp, cold, almost sour, like the breath of something ancient and rotting. Beneath the plank was a scrap of torn paper, yellowed and brittle, stained in one corner with something dark and rust-colored. The handwriting was hurried, sharp strokes, deep impressions, like the author had been desperate. I held it to the moonlight, filtering through the slats of my blinds. "Your fear feeds them. Look once and they're in your eyes." I stared at it. My mind couldn't grasp it fully. My eyes burned, like the words weren't just read, they crawled into me. Branded behind my lids, I tore the paper to shreds, my hands moving on instinct. But it was too late. I felt them. Not outside. Inside, in the corners of my eyes, in the heat building behind them. A presence, thin, invisible, slipping between thought and sight. Like something ancient and patient had been watching me watch myself. Whiskers backed into the closet, never blinking, his gaze fixed on my face like he didn't recognize me anymore. Or maybe he finally saw what else was staring out through my eyes. That night, I didn't dare sleep. Every light in the apartment was on, each bulb humming faintly in the silence, casting sickly pools of yellow across the walls. The kitchen knives were laid out in a neat, sterile row on the counter behind me. I wasn't planning to use them. I just needed something, anything, that felt sharp and solid. Real. Whiskers sat curled on my lap, his body tense and trembling, not in fear, but in restraint. His ears twitched at things I couldn't hear. His tail beat against my thigh like a metronome, counting down to something terrible. My eyes never left the hallway. It stretched out from the living room like a black throat. Too still, too long. The shadows pooled thick at the far end, as though light refused to touch it. My throat was dry, breath shallow. Every second stretched into a minute. My heart thudded hard against my ribs, a beat too fast, as if trying to warn me of something already inside. They say you can't ever see the thing that watches you, you can only feel it. And I did. The sensation crawled across my skin, first the back of my neck, then down my arms, like icy fingers hovering just above the flesh. Every hair stood on end. It was like being observed through a two-way mirror, except the mirror was the air, and the watcher was inside it. Then the lights flickered. Just once, but enough to make me flinch, a whisper brushed against the inside of my ear. A voice not quite human, not quite sound like it wasn't coming from outside my head at all. Soft, loving, dead, Sabrina, Sabrina. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My lips felt sewn shut with terror. I just sat frozen until my gaze was pulled slowly, painfully, toward the blackout window behind me. Don't look, don't look. But I did. I turned my head, trembling like my neck had rusted. I faced the glass pane that looked out into nothing, and my breath caught. There I was, reflected in the darkness, my face pale and pulsing with fear, my eyes wide and wet. But behind me, the hallway showed in the reflection too, and in it movement, the shadows shifted, not smoothly, not naturally, too slow, like a tape dragging frame by frame, but my body wasn't moving. And neither was Whiskers, only the shadows. Then something stepped forward in the glass, just outside the edge of light. It had my shape, my height, my head tilt, but it wasn't me, because its mouth stretched too far, and its eyes didn't blink. I looked down at Whiskers. He was frozen stiff, ears back, pupils huge. A soft growl rumbled in his throat, more like mourning than warning. I could feel his heart racing under his fur, sink to mine. Then I remembered the cat who looked once and was never truly alone again. I never meant to become obsessed with the man next door. Honestly, I tried to ignore it, the sour, almost rancid stench that clung to his clothes like a second skin, the way his garbage bags twitched and throbbed, as if something alive was trapped inside. But when the trash collectors refused to take his bags, saying they were too heavy, something in me snapped. Call me Austin. I'm 31, work nights as an IT technician, and live in a cramped apartment block on the edge of town. I like my life quiet, my routine predictable. But ever since I moved in next to this guy, no name, no friends, just a shadowy figure dragging his garbage bags into the alley, I've been pulled into a nightmare I never saw coming. The man's apartment was a mess. Broken windows covered with thick plastic sheets, peeling paint, and a cracked door that looked like it hadn't been locked in months. But it was the smell that first hit me. The first time I noticed, I was stepping outside for a smoke. The evening air was cool and sharp, but the sour stench hit me like a wall. Rotten meat, old blood, something decaying and foul. It was clinging to the neighbor's clothes, that ragged jacket he wore no matter the weather. I wanted to say something, ask if he was okay, but the words got stuck in my throat. The way he looked, hollow eyes, skin blotchy and pale, made me shiver. Most people would avoid him, but for some reason I kept watching. His garbage bags were the real horror. Black plastic, stretched tight and swollen, bulging with something heavy inside. More than once, I caught the subtle twitching, like whatever was inside wasn't dead yet. One evening, when the street was quiet, and the orange glow of streetlights bathed the cracked pavement, I saw it clearly. The bags shivered and quivered in rhythm, like a heartbeat beneath the plastic. I told myself it was the wind or rats crawling inside. But that explanation didn't hold. The bags moved too deliberately, too consciously. Then came trash day. I was waiting outside when the garbage truck rolled up. The collectors moved swiftly down the street, dumping bags with practiced efficiency. But when they reached my neighbor's bags, they stopped. Two of the men exchanged uneasy glances, then one shook his head. Too heavy, he said gruffly. Can't lift him. The driver sighed and moved on, leaving the bags behind. I caught the neighbor watching from his doorway. His expression was unreadable, almost hungry. When he saw me, he gave a short nod and dragged the bags back inside, moving with a strange, jerky gait. That night, sleep evaded me. The smell seemed to seep through my apartment walls. Every creak, every groan in the building sounded amplified and threatening. I found myself standing outside his door, heart pounding, ears straining for any sound beyond the faint rustle inside. And then I heard it, soft, wet sounds. Like something breathing, something alive. I wanted to tell someone, but who would believe me? The cops shrugged it off when I called, saying there was no evidence. Mr. Lewis, the landlord, avoided my questions like I had the plague. The isolation weighed heavy. I was trapped in a building with a secret that no one wanted to face. Days turned into weeks. I watched from my window as my neighbor dragged his garbage bags outside only to bring them back in again, always at night when no one was watching. One evening, I decided to follow him. Under the cover of darkness, I slipped out and trailed him at a distance. He moved like a ghost, silent except for the soft rustle of plastic. He stopped behind the building, near a patch of overgrown bushes. There, he knelt and ripped open one of the bags. What I saw made my blood run cold. Inside the bag was a mass of twitching, writhing flesh. Animal, human, I couldn't tell. The smell hit me full force, like death itself had been trapped in plastic. The neighbor reached in, pulling out something wrapped in bloodied rags. He hummed softly, almost lovingly, as he unwrapped it. My stomach churned. I wanted to look away, but my eyes were glued. It was a small animal, no, something smaller. A mutilated creature, its eyes still flickering weakly. Suddenly, The neighbor's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto mine, wide and feral. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed, voice low and guttural. I froze. The seconds stretched painfully. Then he shoved the remains back into the bag and vanished into the shadows. I ran home, slammed the door, locked every bolt. But the smell followed me, haunting every corner. Sleep became a distant memory. I dreamt of the neighbors' twitching bags, of rotting flesh and unseen eyes watching from the dark. Then came the nights I heard whispering, soft, unintelligible murmurs seeping through the walls, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I questioned my sanity. Was I losing it? Or was something truly wrong next door? One night, I peeked through the crack in my door and saw the neighbor standing in the hallway. His mouth moved, whispering words I couldn't understand. The garbage bags lay beside him, quivering violently. His eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. I tried to move away, but my feet were frozen. The neighbor turned slowly, a twisted smile curling on his lips. "You see too much," he said softly. That was the last thing I heard before everything went black. I woke up in my apartment the next morning, bruised and disoriented. The garbage bags were gone. So was the neighbor. Everybody calls me Lords. I've been avoiding hospitals since Grandma Rosa passed. I thought I was ready. But the moment I stepped into the abandoned wing of St. Marian's, the air hit me like a memory, cold, stale, with a faint trace of her rose-scented perfume. My heart froze. I had come with two old friends, Michael and Sophia, neighbors from childhood. We were supposed to explore the old East Wing, rumored to close decades ago after a mysterious outbreak. It felt safe, even nostalgic, with childhood laughter echoing down those halls. But as soon as we crossed the threshold past room 210, nostalgia turned to dread. The hallway lights buzzed, half working, casting long shadows. The floor smelled of mildew, old plaster, life sucked out of it. The old intercom crackled upstairs. Code 3, room 206, and then nothing. That name stuck in my skull like an anchor. Room 206, Michael nudged me. "You okay?" I swallowed. "Grandma died in room 206. The words came in a whisper I thought I'd buried years ago. He froze. Sophia reached for my hand. We passed closed doors, 207, 208, all with peeling placards. I tried to stay steady, pretending it didn't matter. But every flicker of light made me jump. As we neared 206, an overwhelming scent drifted. Rosewater perfume, my grandma's. Cold sweat prickled. The intercom crackled again upstairs. A faint voice, soft and melodic, humming the lullaby she used to sing to me. I recognized it instantly, though the voice sounded far older. Sophia squeezed my hand. "Lords, let's go back." My head spun. Still, a part of me felt drawn forward. We slowed down. The silence was thick, pressing on us. Paint peeled from walls in strips, flooring sagged. A wheelchair sat abandoned, rusted. Michael took out his phone light. It illuminated 206's door, half ajar. I stared. Voices whispered from the hallway speaker, wisps of conversation, laughter, crying from a time before cell phones. Bet long before I was born, my pulse thundered. Light flickered, then went out. Only the phone beam and fractured moonlight danced across the ceiling. I saw movement, a silhouette, curved and familiar, at the corner of my vision. In panic, I stumbled backwards. The perfume's smell increased, faint but unmistakable. Grandma's favorite rose scent drenched the air, The door at 206 creaked. I flinched, but it didn't close. Instead, I heard breathing from within. Gentle, rhythmic, I called out quietly. "Grandma," silence. Then, footsteps, soft, pacing inside. I noticed something carved lightly on the frame. Abuela. Cursive, like her handwriting. Despite my pounding heart, I edged toward the door. The intercom crackled again, decades-old voice. "Nurse, please attend room 206, like a fragment of driftwood from the past. The door slid open just far enough to see in. A pale, empty room lit by moonlight through cracked blinds. Bed neatly made. No patient. But the rocking chair by the window was moving slowly, creaking. A silhouette sat there, small, hunched. I stifled a sob. It looked like Grandma, slender, wearing a nightgown I remembered from old photos. Her hair gray, pulled back. She raised a hand, waved. My throat closed. The rose smell was stronger, hugging me close. I stepped forward, then the silhouette vanished. The rocking chair stopped. Silence. Michael and Sophia backed off, fear in their eyes. "I saw her," I whispered. "It was Grandma." They stared, uncertain. I told them how Grandma died in 206 after a surgery gone wrong. Everyone knew. That room had been sealed. Hospital records said it no longer existed. We heard footsteps behind us. We spun around, nobody. The cell phone buzzed. A notification from Grandma's old number. I dropped it. Missteps in the corridor. The perfume followed us like a ghost. The intercom kept paging room 206, even though no ward existed. Michael's phone began playing that same lullaby ringtone he'd set months ago. It was my ringtone. But his phone was silent. The lights flickered and died. I felt a light touch on my shoulder, warm and soft. I turned, empty hallway. Sophia gasped, her eyes watering as the rose scent climaxed. We reached the stairwell. Exit was just ahead. I turned back one last time. From the darkness of the corridor, Grandma's form stepped forward, smiling gently, hand outstretched. She mouthed, "Come." It cut me in two. I tried to speak, but no words came. A wailing sound, a woman's sob mixed with static, both old and timeless. Sophia grabbed me. "Go, lords, go." We fled. Outside, rain began to fall. I gasped for clean air. No sense but rain wash. The old wing towers overhead. I turned back, window lights flickered. I thought I saw her silhouette at the broken blind. Michael and Sophia didn't say a word until they reached the car. But when I looked at the rearview mirror, there she was, her face pale as death, just for a moment. Then gone. A week later, I visited my parents. Grandma's room in our house, her nightgown, favorite rosary, gone. Records from the hospital archivist. Wing closed in 1965. Room 206 had been lost in remodeling. Nobody had records afterwards. No doorway existed, yet here I stand, smelling rose perfume in my sheets. I began hearing whispers. "Abuela." I returned to the abandoned hospital at night. I only made it to room 205 before the haunting sound of that intercom calling room 206 stopped me. I smelled rose perfume filling the halls and fled again. My knees shook with real fear. Now, each night, I hear an intercom break with static. Room 206. Faint but forever echoing, like a memory I can't escape. I've moved out far away. I don't share this often. People think grief can drive you crazy. Maybe they're right. But every once in a while in a quiet room, I smell roses, and I feel her wave. I didn't go back to St. Marian's again. I wanted to believe it was all grief, that the mind can twist what it sees, especially when it's been aching for years. But the world wouldn't let me move on. Every night after I saw her in room 206, I'd wake up at 2:06 a.m., always 2:06 in the morning. The exact time stamped on her death certificate. At first, it was just a coincidence. I even laughed about it once. Weird, right? I told Sophia. But the laughs didn't last. The second week, I started hearing the crack of a hospital intercom in my dreams. Not a dream-like one hers. The same static-laced line from St. Marian's, "Nurse, please report to room 206. Only now it added something else. Lourdes is waiting. The voice was neither hers nor human. Old, groaning, like something choking on dust and time. The lullaby followed it, soft and broken, warping like it was being played on a broken cassette. I tore my radio out of the wall the fourth night. It still turned itself on. My parents moved most of her things after the funeral, but some lingered. Her perfume bottle, her Bible. A small porcelain angel missing one wing. I found them all arranged neatly on my nightstand one morning. I hadn't put them there. I screamed. Dad said it was probably Mom doing it as a tribute. But when I asked her, she went pale and said she hadn't stepped into my room in weeks. And that's when the laughing started. It wasn't a funny laugh. It was that half-choked cough laugh Grandma did when her throat was dry. I heard it in the vents, in the closet. And one time, from underneath my bed, I started sleeping in my car. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go back to room 206, only it didn't exist anymore. When I returned to St. Marian's, I found the hallway blocked, yellowed tarps, mold, broken signs. The place was set for demolition, but my feet carried me back there, even though I knew I shouldn't. There was no room 206, not anymore. They had literally sealed it over. A wall now stood where the door had been still. I smelled roses. I pressed my ear to the wall, nothing for a second. Then, "My Renee, it's warm here. Come see," her voice, low, full of love, and so wrong. It wasn't the voice of the woman who raised me. It was something wearing her memory. I ran. That night, Sophia called me crying. She said she'd had a dream where she was in my grandmother's room, but it wasn't St. Marian's anymore. It was an endless hallway of hospital doors. Each one marked 206. And behind every door, she said, she saw people, crying, whispering, bleeding, begging her not to open theirs. "Your abuela was at the end," she said. She waved at me. Sophia swore she woke up with rose petals scattered across her bedsheets. She hasn't spoken to me since. I needed answers. I dug through hospital archives, online death records, Reddit threads about phantom rooms. That's when I found it, a pattern, multiple hospitals, different cities, different decades. But always one common thing, room 206. It appeared in horror forums, EMT blogs, creepypasta stories, but all too detailed, too specific. One account, dated 1993, said, "The patient in room 206 keeps dying and coming back. Every nurse assigned to that room quits or disappears." But no one believes me because officially, that room doesn't exist anymore. Another one, my grandma died in 206. I saw her again a year later, same room, waving from a hospital that had been shut for decades. One post chilled me. They say room 206 is where lost souls go when they die unready. It lures back the living to join them. I tracked down an old nurse who used to work at St. Marian's, Miss Delaney. She was 87 now, half blind, and living in a nursing home. She smiled when I said room 206, but it wasn't a happy smile. "You saw her, didn't you?" she asked, tapping her cane. I nodded. Lots of people do. After a loved one dies there, sometimes even before. "You think you're special, dear?" but the room calls to everyone who still owes a goodbye. Why is it still there? I asked. Why doesn't it stay dead? She chuckled. Because grief doesn't. I don't know if I'm cursed. Maybe I never said goodbye properly. Maybe something ancient clings to places like St. Marian's, where grief, pain, and love tangle so tightly they can't be pulled apart. But I still see her, not every night, but when the clock hits 2:06 a.m., the shadows shift, the hallway creaks, the scent of rose petals fills the air. And there, at the end of my room or in my reflection, or from the empty rocking chair in the attic, she waves. And in that second, she's not horrifying. She's just lonely, so I wave back. I know I shouldn't, but it's my abuela, and I think part of me already lives in room 206. I now work at a hospice, a different city, different hospital, but every time I pass a room with that number, I pause, because some goodbyes don't end at death. Some spirits linger not to scare you, but because their story was never finished, and some rooms just won't stay closed. From the moment I first moved to our quiet street, that house caught my eye. It's an old Victorian, all peeling paint and cracked wood, wrapped in scaffolding so dense it looks like a giant insect cocoon. Thick tarps flap over its frame, heavy with decades of dust and grime. No one really remembers when the renovation started, or if it ever truly began at all. I'm Zia, a graphic designer by trade, and for years I lived just a few houses down, but I never dared get too close. The rumors were endless, whispered by neighbors over backyard fences or at block parties. Some said the owner vanished years ago. Others claimed the construction crew was a ghost story, people who never changed, never aged, never left. It was like the house existed outside of time, but it wasn't just curiosity that drew me back time and again. It was something darker, a knot of unease that grew tighter with every glance. Something about the place whispered to me, like a secret waiting to be told. Across from the scaffolding, my friend Marcus would joke, "That place is stuck in a time loop or something." Every time I walk by, the same guy in the blue hard hat is there, staring right at me. And when I look back, he waves, like he knows me. Marcus and I shared the neighborhood's collective suspicion, but we also shared something more human, a need to understand what lies beneath the surface of things. We're both flawed, really. I hide my anxiety under layers of forced smiles and overworked days. Marcus masks his loneliness with sarcasm and late-night video games. Maybe that's why we both fixated on that endless renovation. It was the perfect metaphor, stuck, unfinished, and impossible to escape. One early evening, the sky bruised purple with dusk. I stood on my porch watching the sight. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of damp wood, wet tar, and something faintly metallic, like blood but distant, like a memory of it. There was the crew. A handful of men, their faces too smooth, too blank, moving slowly but deliberately. They hammered and sawed in rhythm, but no dust ever rose, and their clothes were always pristine. Their skin was almost too pale, as if dust clung to them like a second layer. One worker, the tallest of the group, turned suddenly and locked eyes with me. His hand raised slowly in a wave. I felt my pulse slam in my throat. I forced myself to wave back, and in that moment, the world shifted, like something paused and rewound. Days turned into weeks, and the house remained shrouded in silence, save for the occasional rhythmic thud of hammering that never seemed to get louder or closer. I began to notice strange things. No delivery trucks, no dumpsters filled with old materials, no sounds of progress other than the same repetitive noises. At night, when the neighborhood was quiet, I sometimes heard faint voices, as if the house whispered to itself. Sometimes the wind would carry sounds of laughter or the distant echo of a child's cry. But the street was empty. No one else seemed to notice. One night, I stood at the end of the block, staring at the house when I saw it, a shadow moving inside the tarp, twisting and turning impossibly fast, like a glitch in reality. My breath caught, but when I blinked, nothing was there. Marcus and I had reached the edge of the scaffolding, just as the afternoon sun began to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like fingers toward the house. I could feel the weight of the air pressing down, thick and heavy with the scent of old wood, wet tar, and something metallic that lingered just beneath the surface. The silence around us was unnerving, broken only by the distant tapping of hammers coming from inside the tarp-covered skeleton of the house. As we stepped closer, the workers' heads turned slowly, as if they had sensed our presence long before we appeared. That tall man, always watching, lifted his eyes to meet mine. There was something deeply unsettling about the way he stared, a calmness that was anything but comforting. His gaze was sharp, knowing, as though he could peer straight into my thoughts and weigh my very soul. My breath hitched, and my skin prickled with goosebumps as his voice slid out in a low whisper, smooth as silk, but with an icy edge that cut through the air. "You shouldn't be here." The words hung between us like a dark warning. My heart thundered, pounding in my ears louder than the rhythmic thud of the hammering inside. I felt the instinctual chill of fear spiral through me, creeping up my spine like cold fingers. Every instinct screamed to run, to put distance between myself and this place that felt less like a home and more like a cage. Marcus and I backed away slowly, but even as our footsteps faded, the sensation remained, an oppressive weight, a suffocating presence. It wasn't just the house that held us in its grasp. The endless scaffolding, the frozen workers, the eternal renovation, they were all parts of something darker, something alive and hungry. Those men, they weren't just construction workers. Their stillness, their unchanging faces, hinted at something otherworldly. They were the wardens of this prison, the silent keepers of a secret older and more twisted than I could have imagined. And as I looked back one last time, the tall man raised his hand again, not just a wave, but a summons. A chilling invitation into a nightmare I was beginning to realize I might never escape. Weeks slipped by, or at least they should have, except something inside me was twisting, unraveling in ways I couldn't fully grasp. The neighborhood around the house marched on as it always did. Leaves turned from vibrant green to fiery red, then brittle brown, and finally vanished with the first snow. People aged, children I once knew growing taller, parents graying at the edges. But the house at the end of the street, wrapped in its endless scaffolding and dusty tarps, remained stubbornly frozen in time. And the crew, those silent figures, wore the same threadbare clothes, kept the same hollow expressions, and repeated their motions with a robotic precision day after day, as though they were caught in a loop they could never break. One chilly morning, Marcus pulled out his phone and froze. "Zia, look at this," he said, voice tight with disbelief. The date blinked back at us, completely wrong, stuck days behind where it should have been. The numbers felt like a cruel joke, a glitch in reality itself. I stared at the screen, heart sinking like a stone, cold dread creeping over me like an icy fog. It was impossible. Time was supposed to flow forward, relentless and unyielding. But here, it bent and twisted, folding in on itself like a dark ripple spreading through the air, trapping everything, people, memories, even moments, inside this house's silent prison. That realization settled deep in my bones, heavier than any fear I'd felt before. It wasn't just a house under renovation. It was a trap, a warp in the fabric of time itself. And I was caught in the middle, watching the world move on around me while I remained stuck, helpless, suspended in an unchanging nightmare. Driven by a mix of obsession and a creeping, gnawing fear that tightened around my chest like a vise, I found myself sinking deeper into the city archives. The air in those dusty rooms was thick with forgotten stories, the faint scent of old paper and mildew curling into my lungs. Flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I flipped through brittle newspapers and yellowed records, chasing shadows of a past long buried. That house, this endless construction site frozen in time, had once belonged to an architect named Elias Marrow, a man who vanished without a trace 50 years ago. Elias was notorious in his day for his near-mad fixation on perfect symmetry and timeless design, a craftsman obsessed with creating something eternal, something untouched by decay or death. But beneath the accolades, the faded headlines and whispered stories hinted at a darker truth. Old newspapers murmured about a terrible tragedy during the house's construction, mysterious accidents, disappearances, and a shadow of suspicion that clung like a thick fog. Neighbors, some long gone, others too afraid to speak openly, recalled strange rituals performed in the dead of night, eerie lights that danced behind the boarded windows, and an ancient curse said to suffocate anyone who dared live there. Elias had vowed to build more than a home. He wanted a sanctuary outside of time itself, an unchanging sanctuary where nothing aged, nothing crumbled, nothing died. The more I uncovered, the heavier the air around me felt, as if the house's story was breathing down my neck, its silent promise wrapping tighter with every revelation. It wasn't just a building. It was a tomb, a monument to obsession and loss, and I was dangerously close to becoming part of its endless, frozen history. One night, heart pounding in my chest and hands shaking more from fear than the cold, I slipped silently behind the heavy tarps that wrapped the house like a suffocating shroud. The air there was thick and heavy, a suffocating mix of damp mold and sharp, biting metal that clawed at my throat. Every breath felt like inhaling decay itself. Then, footsteps echoed softly behind me, slow, deliberate, almost too steady for a living person. I froze, my skin prickling as the workers emerged from the shadows. They didn't glance at me. Their movements were ghost-like, silent and fluid, as if they were part of the scaffolding itself, faceless, drifting phantoms bound to the endless construction. The wooden beams creaked and groaned under invisible weight, as if the house was breathing, alive in some ancient, unnatural way. Then, against the dim glow of my flashlight, something impossible appeared, a doorway where there had been none before, framed by warped wood and shimmering faintly with an eerie light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Drawn by a force I couldn't resist, I stepped through the threshold, and the world warped around me, colors twisting and blending like smoke caught in a restless wind. Time itself seemed to unravel, stretching and folding in impossible ways, dragging me into a realm where nothing followed the rules I'd ever known. Fear tangled with awe and madness, gripping me tight as I realized I had crossed into something beyond understanding. Inside, the house seemed to pulse with a slow, unnatural rhythm, as if its very walls were breathing, expanding and contracting like the chest of some slumbering beast. The floor beneath me throbbed faintly, a subtle vibration that echoed through my bones, making my skin crawl with cold dread. Around me, the workers moved with a ghostly stillness, their forms blurred and indistinct, like echoes caught between moments. Tihei were no longer men, but shadows, trapped, condemned to an endless task that stretched beyond time itself. Each hammer strike, each measured step, felt hollow, as if they were caught in a loop of obsession spun by Elias's unraveling mind. The architect's madness had woven a prison out of the house, binding these souls to its relentless construction. Then the truth slammed into me with the weight of a nightmare. This house was not renovating, not improving or healing. It was a trap, a prison built from obsession and despair, swallowing lives whole. And now, with a cold shock of terror, I knew I was becoming part of it. My own soul was being pulled into the endless build, caught in the architecture of madness that refused to end. I escaped that night, but the experience stayed with me like a scar. The house still stands, still wrapped in tarps, still under endless renovation. Some nights, when the wind is just right, I swear I hear hammering far away, like a faint heartbeat from the past. And sometimes, when I pass that street, I catch the eye of a worker who waves, and I wonder if one day I'll join the crew who never leaves. Because some places don't just trap bodies, they trap time itself. I never thought waking up at 3 a.m. could feel so wrong. But on that night, it did. The kind of wrong that twists your gut, makes your skin crawl, and sends a chill down your spine that no blanket can fix. I woke up abruptly, heart pounding, with a dry mouth and a strange taste like dirt and something else. I blinked against the darkness, trying to orient myself. My bedroom was quiet except for the faint sound of dirt crumbling somewhere outside the walls. I sat up and froze. Right there, on the wall beside my bed, were muddy handprints. 4 distinct prints, smudged and glistening faintly in the moonlight. Next to them were shallow claw marks, gouged deep enough to catch shadows in their crevices. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was a nightmare, or some hallucination born from a long day's exhaustion. But the gritty texture on my fingertips after touching the wall told me otherwise. The handprints were real, and they were fresh. My name's James. I'm a graphic designer living alone in an old townhouse on the outskirts of a small town surrounded by dense woods. I moved here a few months ago, craving peace after a messy breakup and a stressful job. I wanted solitude, but solitude doesn't always bring peace. The house itself is an aging relic, creaky floorboards, peeling wallpaper, a garden that's more wild than tame. The previous owner was an old woman who disappeared without a trace. The neighbors whispered about spirits, curses, and earthbound entities tied to the land. But I chalked it up to small-town folklore until that night, in the days leading up to 3 a.m. I had noticed odd things, subtle at first. The scent of damp earth that lingered in my room, even after airing it out. Faint rustling sounds, like footsteps brushing against leaves just beyond the window. The garden looked disturbed, soil turned over, as if something had been digging. I blamed raccoons or stray cats. But the night I woke up to the muddy handprints, I knew it was something else. The scent in the room was unlike anything I'd smelled before. Rich, loamy earth mixed with a faint metallic tang, like wet clay and old blood. It made my stomach churn with disgust. As I stared at the marks, I heard it, soft at first, like a low growl buried beneath the walls, then louder, more urgent. It felt like the house itself was breathing with some dark life my breath caught. The claw marks on the wall began to seem less accidental, more like a warning carved with intent. During the day, I searched the garden for clues. The soil was loose in places where the grass had been uprooted, and fresh mud stuck to the soles of my shoes. Near the back fence, I found prints, large, irregular, unlike any animal I knew. They led deep into the woods that bordered my property. I thought about following them, but the heavy silence of the forest made my skin crawl. Something was watching, waiting. Curious and unnerved, I visited the town's library to research the land. The old woman who owned the house before me had been a recluse named Mrs. Gray. The records hinted she was obsessed with an ancient earth spirit worshipped by the original settlers. Legend said the spirit guarded the forest, punishing those who disrespected the land. They called it the Muddy One, a creature neither alive nor dead, bound to the soil and shadows. I laughed it off at first. Superstition for small-town folk. But every story I read sounded like the strange events unfolding around me. That night, I resolved to stay awake and watch. At exactly 3 a.m., the temperature in my room dropped sharply. The silence broke with a faint scratching on the walls, like claws scraping against plaster. Then came the smell again, stronger, almost suffocating. I turned my flashlight toward the corner of the room. A shadow moved, slow, hulking, with a faint glimmer of wet mud on its skin. The thing growled low and guttural, eyes like dark pits reflecting no light. I wanted to run, but my legs were frozen. After that night, I struggled to distinguish reality from nightmare. The muddy handprints multiplied, appearing on walls, windows, even the ceiling. Sometimes, in the dead quiet, I heard whispers from the dirt outside, words I couldn't understand but felt in my bones. I couldn't sleep. My work suffered. Friends stopped calling back. Was I going crazy? Or was something else taking hold of my life? Desperate for answers, I returned to the library and found an obscure book on local rituals. To appease the Muddy One, it said, one must offer a gift of soil mixed with something pure, a symbol of respect and surrender. I gathered dirt from my garden, mixed it with water from the town's sacred spring, and laid the offering by the back fence under the full moon. For hours, I waited. The air was still, heavy, charged. That night, I felt watched again, but this time less hostile, more expectant. At 3 a.m., the growling returned, but it faded as a figure stepped from the shadows. It was humanoid, but covered in mud and leaves, eyes glowing faintly. It reached toward the offering, touched the earth gently, and then vanished. The handprints stopped appearing. The house felt lighter, the air less oppressive. Now, weeks later, the house feels normal again, but I'm changed. I respect the land differently. I understand the stories hold truths. I learned that some spirits don't want to harm, just to be acknowledged. Sometimes, the past claws at your walls, muddy and raw, reminding you where you came from. I don't know if I was haunted by a spirit or by my own mind struggling with isolation and guilt over leaving my past behind. but I do know that night changed me. I still wake at odd hours, sometimes smelling damp earth, sometimes hearing faint growls in the distance. But now, I listen. I'm Marcus. I started as a night guard at Hawthorne Penitentiary's East Wing just 2 weeks ago. The kind of place where the walls don't just hold echoes, they breathe with them. Every corridor hums with something ancient, something left behind. The lighting is low, too low. It hums overhead like a tired wasp, casting long shadows that shift and dance, even when nothing's moving. My boots squeak on the waxed linoleum, and each step feels like it disturbs something that would rather be forgotten. Tonight was the first time I walked past cell 606 alone. That part of the East Wing is colder, inexplicably. The moment I stepped near it, the temperature dropped like a mood shift at a funeral. The silence grew denser there, like the air itself was holding its breath. I told myself I was just imagining things, new job jitters, nerves, too much caffeine. But just before midnight, I heard it a clank, not the kind you brush off, no creaky pipe, no loose vent. It was unmistakable, the metallic snap of a chain dragging across concrete, the kind of sound that grabs your spine and holds it tight. Earlier, I'd met David, the senior guard. The guy's polite but worn thin, like he'd seen too much and stopped asking questions long ago. His eyes don't really meet yours when he talks, like he's half expecting something to happen behind you. Then there's Anna, younger than him but sharper. She's been training me mostly through dusty old security tapes and quick whispers between shift changes. She tells me more with what she won't say. Every time cell 606 comes up, she changes the subject or taps her pen nervously. They both warned me not to bother with cell 606, said it was sealed and best left that way. Its last occupant was a man they all called the Monster of East Block, a lifer. No appeals, no visitors, and no remorse. Executed 20 years ago, right there on that wing. According to Anna, he never screamed, never struggled, just stared, smiled. S'd one thing before they put the needle in his arm: I'll still be here. And yet, trays still show up outside that cell, 3 times a week, like clockwork. No matter who's on kitchen duty or which guard is on rotation, the tray appears: dry bread, congealed vegetables, a tin cup of water. It sits on the floor outside 606, untouched. Or at least that's what I thought, until tonight. When I asked David why the hell we were feeding a dead man, he didn't laugh. He didn't brush it off. His face went pale, not just surprised, but drained, like my question had pulled something old and awful to the surface. His eyes didn't blink for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Just don't touch the tray. Ever." That's when I realized no one was feeding anything. They were appeasing it. It's no kitchen staff trick. I double-checked the roster. I talked to Marco, the head cook, tough guy, sleeves always rolled up, hands that have seen decades of cuts and grease. He swore on his mother's grave they only prepare meals for cells 605 and 607. Number 606, he said, frowning. We don't even got that one on the list anymore. But the tray still shows up. Same thing each time, stale, hard bread that cracks if you even think about biting it. Mushy green beans the color of pond scum, and a dented tin cup filled just shy of halfway with lukewarm water. And it's always untouched. Always neatly placed right outside the barred slot of 606, like someone, something, is expecting it. during break in the dim-lit staff room, over a vending machine coffee that tasted like rust and regret. I overheard Anna murmuring to one of the guards. Her voice was low, like she didn't want to risk the walls remembering. "Sometimes you hear chains," she said, rubbing her forearm like she was suddenly cold. "Dragging, or the door'll rattle hard like someone's pushing from the inside." She paused then, the silence thick. I watched her throat move as she swallowed, eyes staring at nothing. "Not your basic building shift. Doesn't sound like metal settling, it sounds angry." That stayed with me. Later, when I was back on my post near the East Hall, alone but for the hum of the overhead lights and the quiet buzz of the ancient CCTV monitor, I caught it. A subtle movement in the corner of my eye. The thick iron door of cell 606, sealed tight for decades, shifted inward. Just barely, but it wasn't wind. There was no wind, no draft. The corridor was still. The kind of stillness that makes your ears ring with your own heartbeat. The door didn't creak or moan like in horror movies. It clicked, mechanical and cold. Then it stopped, hung there for a second like it was thinking, and then clanged shut, so loud it made me jump and knock over my flashlight. My heart hammered like it was trying to escape my chest. My breath came short, like I'd just run up 4 flights of stairs. But I stayed. Foolish, maybe. Brave. Probably not. But I couldn't leave. I couldn't not finish my sweep. I had to know, had to see. That's when I heard it, from the vent above the corridor. Barely more than breath. "Let me out." The words were thin and soft, not loud enough to echo, but cold enough to freeze the blood in my veins. Like someone was whispering through their teeth, hoarse and dry. I stood there, body locked, pulse roaring in my ears. The voice didn't come again. There was no response, no scream, just silence after. The kind that doesn't mean peace, it means waiting. I don't know how I moved, how I managed to finish the sweep with my legs like stone and my neck twitching with every shadow behind me. But I did. I walked the full length of that cursed hall and back again. And when I passed 606 once more, the tray was gone. On night 3, the sound came sharper, more violent. Chains clattering like someone yanking them in frustration, links scraping metal with frantic, cruel intent. I was mid-check near the control booth when it hit, echoing hard off the concrete, bouncing through the corridor like it had a purpose. I bolted down the block, keys jangling, boots slapping against the cold tile. My mind raced. Please let this be a drill. Just David testing protocol. Just Anna pulling some old-school scare. But there were no voices, no walkie callouts, no signs of life at all. Just that cursed corridor stretching long and lifeless under the flickering overhead lights. Every few bulbs humming low and dying with a sad little flicker. Then I saw it. Cell 606, its door, sealed for 2 decades, was slightly ajar, not wide. Just a crack, like it had been pushed from the inside, then left waiting for someone to be stupid enough to look in. My breath hitched. I forced myself forward. My flashlight cut into the blackness, but it couldn't penetrate what was beyond that door. It was wrongly dark. Not just absence of light dark. It was the kind of black that seemed to drink in the beam and spit back nothing. The kind that makes your bones feel hollow. The tray sat on the floor, right where it always did, untouched, like it had been set down in offering. I could see condensation clinging to the cup's metal lip, the vegetables dull and gray, steamed over but never steaming. A terrible stillness clung to the air, heavy with rust and something else like old sweat soaked into cinder block, and a copper tang that curled behind your teeth. I backed out. I didn't call for backup. I couldn't explain why. Some primitive part of me screamed that whatever was in there, whatever might be in there, shouldn't hear me. Back at the booth, I turned to the camera feed. I scrubbed back through the footage. At first, just grain, black, static, empty frame. Then, just past 2:13 a.m. mark, movement. A flicker, and there it was, a hunched figure. Not walking, not pacing like a man, but dragging itself in a slow, violent rhythm. Its shoulders were wrong, broad, and sagged forward, like the bones beneath didn't know how to be human anymore. Chains looped around its wrists, thick and dark, and it was pulling them, dragging them across the concrete with a sound that set my teeth on edge even through the muted playback. I watched it pace 3 steps, then stop. Its head twisted too far, the way a dream figure looks just before you wake up screaming. My blood ran cold. Not a metaphor, not just a phrase. It was like something inside me froze. Like my body knew something that my mind refused to believe. I stared at the screen long after the figure had faded into the corner, until only the still black frame remained. Static buzzed quietly from the old monitor, and in that small booth, under fluorescent buzz and haunted silence, I realized the worst part. The cell was still supposed to be empty. I couldn't sleep, not because of the noise, not because of the long shifts or the fluorescent flicker that still buzzed behind my eyes hours after I left the East Wing. It was what I saw, what the cameras showed, and what the air felt like after. That pressure, that awareness, that thing pacing like its routine never ended. I dove into the archives during my break, half hoping I'd find something logical, something explainable. But instead, I found history, the kind of history no one puts on official records. Local legends, officer notes scribbled in margins, security anomalies swept under rusting file cabinets. The deeper I searched, the more I found disturbing patterns. Across centuries and across prisons, similar reports surfaced. At Folsom, guards whispered about a phantom train whistle in solitary. In Louisiana, there were tales of the night walker, a shadow pacing the same 6 steps outside cell 14, long after its inmate was buried. One inmate folklore site, buried in the depths of old forums, spoke of condemned souls tied to their final routines, echoing habits even in death. That thought chilled me in a way no draft ever could. Because cell 606 had a routine, and it was being followed. The last man in there, Philip Harrow, was executed by lethal injection in 2005. I dug up his records from the basement logs. No one likes to say his name now. The guards who were there, the older ones, all transferred out or never talked again. Harrow was a sadist, a murderer without remorse, a man who cut without blinking. His final words were recorded on a brittle cassette, labeled in fading pen, "I'll stay for supper." No one thought anything of it then, but a few weeks after his death, trays began appearing outside 606, and no one could trace who ordered them. Anna mentioned it once, quietly, while we were mopping up the south corridor. She said guards would sometimes hear the tray wheels roll down the block, hear the clatter stop at 606, then nothing. Just the faint echo of chains, the squeak of rubber soles dragging the floor. They'd follow the sound and find the tray sitting there, untouched, just like clockwork. The next night, I barely made it halfway through my shift. I was weak, nauseous, with a headache thumping behind my eyes. The cold seemed to come from inside my uniform, not outside it. My skin dampened. Sweat soaked through my back as though my body knew something before my brain did. David saw me shaking at the monitors and took over without a word. He said something that chilled deeper than the footage. "He never made parole," David muttered, his voice thin, like he was saying it out of obligation. "He just stayed." I looked at him. His eyes were watery. He blinked hard, holding something back. "No one sits outside 606, he added. "Not after dark, not anymore." He refused to take the tray the next round, so I did. It felt like a dare. Or maybe guilt. Or some twisted need to prove I wasn't afraid. I wasn't sure what emotion was bigger, terror, defiance, or the strange numbness swallowing them both. I walked down the east wing corridor, the tray trembling slightly in my hands. It was always the same: the limp bread, the pale vegetables, the cup of lukewarm tap water. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud against the tile, like the air was thinner here, less forgiving. When I reached 606, I hesitated. The door was sealed, sure, but I felt something behind it. The way you know someone's watching you from across a window. Not through sight, but some primitive pull in your chest. I lowered the tray, turned, then heard it clink. A metallic whisper behind me, sharper than breath. I froze, my spine locked in place. I didn't want to turn. I was scared what I'd see if I did. But slowly, as if some part of me moved without permission, I twisted my head. The tray had moved. It slid slightly forward, not dropped, not kicked. Pushed, I didn't wait. I backed away, each step heavy with panic I barely kept hidden. Later that night, I checked the camera feed again. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the feed warped slightly, like static fuzzed just beneath the surface. Then movement. The same hunched figure. But this time it stood. It rose with a slow, jerking motion, as though the weight of its own bones was unbearable. The chains that trailed from its arms clattered against the cell bars as it dragged them up, shoulder muscles flexing under torn fabric. It turned toward the door, toward me. As if it knew who placed the tray, the mic didn't catch any audio, but I could see the figure's mouth open wide. A silent scream, a bellow or plea, I don't know which. Its eyes glowed faintly like dying embers. It stepped forward, reached for the door, and vanished. The door didn't budge. The camera flickered, returned to stillness. But when I checked the hallway, the tray was gone. The next morning, Anna looked pale, eyes rimmed red like she hadn't slept. Neither had I. We sat in the dim break room, the security footage pulled up on her old work tablet. She skipped to 3:06 a.m. I clenched my coffee cup, heat doing nothing for the chill that soaked into my fingertips. There it was. The camera showed cell 606, dead quiet at first. But then, in the corner of the screen, a haze began to rise. Not dust, not condensation. This moved with intention, swirling unnaturally in tight spirals. Like smoke, but with weight, with shape. It rolled upward, curling into something vaguely human. Anna leaned in as the face began to emerge through the bars. It was the same figure I'd seen before, but this time closer. Its face was hollow, stretched. A death mask made of wax. Eyes bulged and pressed against skin turned nearly translucent from the strain, like they wanted to escape their sockets. There were no lips, just teeth, bared like they were sewn in a permanent sneer. It didn't blink, didn't breathe. Just stared, skin fused to the cold iron bars. Then the screen blinked off, just like that. Static washed across the tablet. Anna flinched. I heard her breath catch before she slammed the device shut. Enough. She wasn't one to show fear, not like this. But she stood stiffly, shoulders trembling ever so slightly beneath her uniform. She called in a full-time staff guard, someone from the admin wing who never came down east. Forced them to inspect the cell with a key she hadn't touched in years. they opened it. The floor was coated in an unnatural stillness, undisturbed dust, thick like powder. But in the center, right beneath the security camera's blind spot, was a perfect circle, about the size of a man's boots. The only mark, like someone had stood there for hours just watching, and the tray, gone. Again, that night, I reached my limit. I could no longer pretend this wasn't happening. The silence after each encounter only fed the dread living in my gut. So I made a decision, reckless, maybe stupid, but it felt necessary. I needed answers. I needed proof of what I felt watching me in the dark. I waited until the cameras were rotating, until most of the prison was asleep behind brick and bolt. I stood just down the hall from 606, the tray cradled in my hands. The food felt heavier now, like gravity itself pressed harder in this hallway. My walkie crackled, then fizzled into static. I smacked it against my palm. No change. Then it began. The sound of chains dragging, slow and deliberate, echoed up the corridor like they were being pulled just beyond the light. The buzz of the fluorescents overhead flickered with rhythmic pulses, casting shadows that twitched along the tile. Then I saw it, flickering just beyond the cell window, a shape. Flickering, twitching like frames skipping in a broken reel of film. It wasn't walking. It was glitching forward too fast, then too slow, like it was struggling to stay within this world's rules. I clenched the tray tighter, my heart hammered as I stepped to the cell door. My voice trembled as I whispered, "Philip Harrow, want your supper?" The effect was immediate. The shape lunged. Not stepped, not moved, launched. The motion snapped the air. It crashed against the inside of the cell with such force that the steel groaned beneath the blow. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the tray, my back slamming against the opposite wall. I could see it through the window now, fully formed. Gaunt, writhing, a figure in a decaying uniform, arms bound in rusting manacles that disappeared into the black behind him. His eyes locked onto mine, not through, not at, but into. Piercing, accusing, desperate, the door began to rattle violently. The sound of chains flailing, metal shrieking. Every instinct screamed to run, then came the whisper. Clear, cold, inside my ears, bypassing the sound of the door. "Thank you." And then nothing. Silence fell like a stone. The light steadied. The chains ceased, but the tray was gone from my hands. I fled like hell was at my heels, heart slamming, legs unsteady, cold sweat soaking my back and the collar of my uniform. The tray was gone before I hit the turn in the corridor, as if it had dissolved into smoke behind me. My hands still trembled, fingertips numb, as if they'd touched something wrong, not just cold, but old, like I'd brushed against time that refused to move forward. I found David and Anna in the break room, dimly lit by the buzzing overhead bulb. David was already standing like he knew. He looked at me, no surprise in his eyes, just that hollow resignation I'd come to associate with this place. He stepped forward, gently brushing my shoulder like a father trying to ground a shaken child. His hand was clammy. "It's done," he whispered, his voice brittle like dry paper. He ate. I couldn't speak, couldn't ask what that even meant. After that night, everything stopped. No more trays appeared, not outside cell 606, not anywhere. No more dragging chains, no rattling doors, even the oppressive cold around that cell gone. It was like the prison had exhaled, like it had finally released whatever it had been holding inside for so long. But peace is a lie told by silence, because when we reviewed the cameras during shift changes, the feed still showed something. Every night at 3:06 a.m., the screen would blur just slightly, At first, we told ourselves it was dust, glitching hardware. But no, it was a shape, a man, or what used to be one pacing, always pacing inside cell 606. Over and over, same path, same rhythm. Head down, chains brushing tile, never looking up, never stopping. It was him, still him. Past warnings weren't just caution, they were confessions. Everyone knew. They just learned how to live around it. I couldn't. I quit 2 days later. Walked out of Hawthorne's East Wing and didn't look back. David didn't try to stop me. Anna hugged me goodbye, quick and quiet, like she was afraid speaking too long would trap me there again. But leaving didn't fix it. The first time I found the note, it was folded neatly on my kitchen counter. The paper was crisp, the ink fresh, and the handwriting unmistakably mine. But I had not written it. The message was simple: do not trust your memories. I stared at the note, my fingers trembling as I held it. The penmanship mirrored mine perfectly, the loops, the slants, even the slight smudge I often left on my tea tickets. A chill ran down my spine. I lived alone in a modest apartment in the heart of the city. The walls were thin, the floors creaked, and the air always carried a hint of dampness. It was not much, but it was home, or so I thought. I tried to rationalize the note. Perhaps I had written it during a moment of absent-mindedness. Maybe it was a prank, but deep down, I knew neither was true. That night, I placed the note in my desk drawer and tried to forget about it. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it was filled with fragmented dreams of ink-stained hands and whispered warnings. The following morning, I awoke to find another note, this time on my bathroom mirror. The steam from my shower had caused the ink to bleed slightly, but the message was still legible. She's watching. Panic surged through me. I tore the note from the mirror and searched my apartment, checking every lock and window. Everything was secure. There was no sign of forced entry, but the sense of unease lingered. I confided in my friend Julia, a pragmatic woman with a penchant for the supernatural. She listened intently, her brow furrowed. It could be a spirit, she suggested. Sometimes they mimic the living to communicate. I scoffed at the idea. Ghosts were not real. But as the days passed and the notes continued to appear, each one more unsettling than the last, I began to question my skepticism. One evening, as I prepared for bed, I caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. When I looked back, my reflection was smiling. I wasn't. I stumbled back, heart pounding. The reflection returned to normal, mirroring my terrified expression. I reached out to touch the glass, half expecting it to be cold and solid. It was, but the sense of wrongness remained. That night, I dreamed of a shadowy figure standing behind me, its face obscured. It whispered in a voice that sounded like mine, but distorted. "You cannot escape, Julia." Ever the investigator brought over a set of tools. EMF detectors, a spirit box, and a camera. We set them up around the apartment, focusing on the bathroom and bedroom. As night fell, the devices remained silent. But just as we began to relax, the spirit box crackled to life, emitting a garbled voice. Mine, Julia and I exchanged glances, fear evident in our eyes. She reviewed the camera footage and gasped. On the screen, a translucent figure stood behind me as I slept, its face a twisted version of mine. "It's mimicking you," Julia whispered, determined to uncover the truth. I delved into the apartment's history. I discovered that a previous tenant, a woman named Sarah, had died under mysterious circumstances. Her journals spoke of a presence in the mirrors, a doppelganger that slowly took over her life. The parallels were uncanny. I felt a connection to Sarah, as if our experiences were intertwined. I knew I had to find a way to break the cycle. With Julia's help, we devised a plan to confront the entity. Using a combination of mirrors and candles, we created a circle in the living room. I sat in the center, holding one of the notes. As the flames flickered, the air grew cold. The mirrors darkened and the figure appeared, its form shifting and unstable. It reached out and I felt a pull, as if it were trying to merge with me. I resisted, focusing on my memories, my identity. I shouted, "You are not me." The entity screamed, a sound like shattering glass, and vanished. The apartment felt lighter, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The notes ceased, and the mirrors reflected only what they should. I felt a sense of peace, though the scars of the experience remained. Julia and I remained close, bonded by the ordeal. We often discussed the events, trying to make sense of them, but some questions remained unanswered. Months later, as I unpacked a box from storage, I found a note at the bottom. It was in my handwriting, but aged and yellowed. The message read, "I am still here." I stared at it, heart pounding. The mirrors remained normal, and no other signs appeared. But the unease returned, a reminder that some things never truly leave. It started with a noise. Nothing big, just a faint creak in the quiet house, but enough to prick the edges of my calm like a cold breeze slipping under a door. I was home alone, as usual, in my little apartment on the edge of town. The kind of place that felt safe during the day, but morphed into something else at night. My name is Alexa, by the way. I'm not a hero or brave in any particular way. More the type to want to lock myself in my bedroom and avoid trouble altogether. Yet here I was, standing in my living room at midnight, flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. I had just been cleaning when the power flickered and then went out entirely. The darkness swallowed everything. I remembered the closet, the one that always gave me a little chill. Its old wooden door with rusty hinges that groaned whenever it moved. I remembered closing it firmly about 10 minutes ago. Now, it was open. I knew it was open because the narrow crack of blackness split the wall like a wound. The moonlight streaming in from the window painted a thin, cold beam across the floor, landing right at that gaping entrance. The air was thick, heavier somehow, like the silence itself was watching. Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from Bobby, my best friend since childhood and the one person who always managed to pull me back from the edge when I started spiraling into my anxieties. "You still there? Power out too?" I typed back. "Yeah, something feels off." Bobby always knew what to say, even if he couldn't be here. I wished he was, because that night the closet wasn't just open, it was a gateway to something I couldn't explain. I told him about the door, about how I was sure I had closed it, how the hinges creaked slowly, like a whispered breath escaping from the dark. And then the faintest sound, a whisper almost too soft to catch, but there, "I'm still here." My heart hammered loud enough to drown out the buzzing of the silent house. The whisper repeated, barely audible, teasing at the edges of my hearing. I raised my flashlight and aimed it at the closet. The beam quivered, casting dancing shadows that looked like twisted faces across the walls. The inside was an abyss, a hollow so black that it seemed to suck the light in, swallowing it whole. The door creaked again. Slowly, almost deliberately, I wanted to run, to slam the door shut and bolt down the hall. but my feet were glued to the floor, my breath shallow and caught in my throat. The whisper came again, this time clearer, chillingly intimate. I'm still here. Why was I so scared of this closet? It wasn't just the creaks or the dark. When I was a kid, my mom used to tell me stories about the old house we lived in before we moved here. Stories about a shadow that lived inside the closet, waiting for someone to open the door. Of course, I never believed those stories. Or at least I thought I didn't. But now, with the power out and the door wide open, those childhood fears came crashing back like waves. I questioned my own mind. Was this real? Or was I imagining it all? The stress, the isolation, the darkness, was it playing tricks on me? I decided to move closer. The beam of the flashlight cut through the thick darkness, revealing nothing but the worn wooden floor and a few scattered clothes tossed inside. No monster, no shadow, just silence. But then the whisper came again, this time from the back of the closet, deeper than before. I'm still here. I froze. The voice wasn't human. It was distorted, echoing, layered with static, like a radio struggling to pick up a signal. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight. I turned slowly to call Bobby. My fingers trembled as I tapped his name. No reply. The silence pressed in. The house felt different, alive. Watching, suddenly, the power blinked on for a fraction of a second. The hallway light flickered, and then it went out again, but that wasn't all. My TV, which I had left off hours ago, buzzed to life on its own. Static filled the screen, and through the crackling noise, I thought I heard words. I'm still here. I felt a cold draft snake around my ankles. The closet door creaked again, opening wider as if inviting me in. I backed away slowly, heart pounding so hard I could hear it echo in my ears. The house seemed to close in on me, the walls breathing like lungs. Was this really happening, or was I losing my mind? The lines between reality and fear blurred. Every shadow looked alive. Every sound was a threat. I remembered Bobby's words from earlier. Stay calm. Stay grounded. Easier said than done. Part 8. The haunting's roots. As dawn approached, I found an old journal in the attic, my mom's, filled with stories about the house and its dark past. The closet had once belonged to a little girl who vanished without a trace decades ago. Legend said she never left, that she was trapped in the closet, her spirit lingering in the darkness, whispering for someone to remember. The more I read, the heavier the air felt. The house wasn't just haunted. It was a tomb. That night, armed with a flashlight and my mother's journal, I faced the closet again. The door was slightly ajar, just like before. I whispered softly, I see you. I hear you. The door creaked open more, and the whisper came, this time sadder, almost pleading, don't forget me. I sat on the floor, tears streaming down my face. Alone, terrified, but connected to something beyond understanding. I never imagined my dead-end job in a bland cubicle could spiral into something straight out of a nightmare. But then again, no one ever expects to find a file labeled "The Office Secret," tucked away in a forgotten drawer, hidden under stacks of dusty folders no one dared to touch. My name's Nikki, working in middle management at Hargrove Industries, a company so dull it could put an insomniac to sleep. I used to think corporate life was just endless meetings, awkward water cooler chats, and pointless emails. Now I'm not so sure. It all started on an ordinary Wednesday. My coworker, Jason, who's always juggling a million tasks, knocked over a filing cabinet while rushing to a meeting. papers spilled everywhere. As I helped pick them up, my fingers brushed against an oddly thick folder at the bottom, plain, unmarked except for one typed label on the tab. The office secret. Jason looked at me with tired eyes. "No idea where this came from," he muttered, adjusting his glasses. He's like me, mid-20s, a little burnt out but still clinging to some shred of optimism about his career. I couldn't shake the feeling that this folder wasn't meant for casual discovery. The office was unusually quiet for once. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as the hum of the AC seemed to grow louder, almost oppressive. Cubicles stretched in endless rows, their gray walls whispering of monotony and hidden stories. I slipped the folder into my bag, heart hammering. I didn't know why I felt drawn to it, curiosity, boredom, or something darker. That night, I stayed late at my apartment, pulling out the folder. The documents inside were unlike anything I'd ever seen at Hargrove. They detailed secret projects, off-the-books operations, and mentions of clients no one talked about. Names were redacted, but the language was chilling, references to human trials, behavioral conditioning, and long-term monitoring. The deeper I read, the heavier the air around me felt. The quiet of my apartment was punctuated by the occasional creak of the old floorboards, the distant barking of a dog, even the faint hum of my fridge. Each mundane sound suddenly felt sinister, as if I was being watched. I tried to share what I found with Jason the next day, but he dodged my questions, eyes darting nervously. "Nikki, some things are better left alone," he warned, voice low. From that day forward, strange things started happening. My phone would buzz with messages from unknown numbers, blank texts. I'd catch fleeting shadows in the corner of my eye at work. And the files, more would mysteriously appear on my desk. Photos, notes, documents that hinted at surveillance, threats. Was I losing my mind? Or was the company watching me, trying to silence me? Sleep was impossible. I kept replaying every interaction, every glance. Was Leable from accounting really as friendly as she seemed? Or was she part of this dark web? Every reflection in the office windows or computer screens felt off, distorted. Sometimes, I swear I saw my own face staring back with eyes that weren't mine. I knew I had to get out, expose the truth, or vanish trying. But the company was everywhere. Emails from HR threatening disciplinary action, subtle warnings from my manager, and the cold silence from coworkers who suddenly avoided me. The line between reality and paranoia blurred completely. The night I found a voicemail on my phone, static at first, then a voice whispering, "You shouldn't have looked." I quit the job the next morning, leaving the folder behind and never looking back. I reported what I could to the authorities, but without hard evidence, it all felt like chasing shadows. Now, whenever I walk past the sleek Hargrove building, I feel a chill, not from ghosts or monsters, but from the very real fear of corporate power hiding darkness behind glass walls. The secret might still be there, buried deep, waiting for the next curious soul to find it. And I live with the knowledge that sometimes the scariest things aren't supernatural. They're the invisible chains that trap you in a place where no one will hear your scream. I started my shift at 10 p.m. I'm Jose, the night janitor at the old central office building downtown. I've done this for nearly 5 years, late shifts, cold coffee, echoing hallways, double-locked doors, flickering lights, nothing unusual. That night, I felt different, more on edge. I pushed a mop bucket down corridor A. At roughly 2 a.m., I passed the wall of mirrors lining the eastern wing. One mirror caught my eye. The reflection jerked, not matching my movements. My heart pounded. I froze, staring, my own reflection, shouldering the mop, paused. But I didn't. That's when I realized something was off. Earlier, I'd passed Jerry, the guard, near the control room. He waved tiredly and said, "Night shift treating you okay?" I nodded, mumbled, "Same old." Clara, the receptionist, left a box of donuts in the break room before heading home. The building was half empty, office tenants gone, dusty chairs, untouched cubicles, slide projectors stashed away. Those mirrors used to be Dacre. Now they were like windows into another world, a world that sometimes glitched. I touched the mirror's frame, cold metal, lipstick stains at eye level. Someone had been here. My reflection blinked one beat after I did, then it smiled. I did not smile, I jolted back. My chest burned. The building lights began to flicker rhythmically, like someone hit a dimmer switch. A faint scratching began inside the glass. Muffled whispers joined, just beyond hearing words shifting, unaligned with my lips. I pressed my ear to the mirror. A faint voice slowly said, "You're not alone." Heart in my throat, I jerked away. Mop fell. It clattered, metal wheels rolling against tile. The hallway lights died, plunging me in near darkness. I grabbed my flashlight, shook it on. Beam landed on nothing. All reflections still remained, waiting. I forced myself forward. At the end of the corridor, another mirror crackled with a reflection of something crouched behind me. By the time I whirled, corridor empty, the building's AC kicked in low rumble, cold wind sweeping over me. The smell of damp and vacuum cleaner, exhaust swirled, mixing with metallic HVAC scent. Moonlight poured through tinted windows, spotlighting the mirrors. I recalled a story, urban legend among night staff, that mirrors sometimes trap souls or show others shadows. Something about Bloody Mary, about rituals and midnights. I pressed my thumb on the glass. No print, but the tapping came again, as if the glass had a heartbeat. I jumped back. I remembered the Reaper's image, a haunted mirror where the Reaper appears. This felt like that. But this was my mirror, my building. This fear felt personal. Back in the break room, I stared at my face in the cupboard mirror. I blinked, reflection stayed focused, staring blank. My hand twitched and I slammed it down on the table. Coffee spilled. I remember thinking, what if I'm losing it? But then, that smile again, just a flicker in my peripheral, that tapping. That voice, look. I started avoiding mirrors, past them quickly, eyes forward, but they always showed me. And then not me, during cleaning I'd catch glimpses, a distortion where my reflection would seem longer, thinner. Eyeless shadows behind me. Then it'd vanish. Once, the intercom crackled. "Can janitor check room 317? My voice replied, but my mouth didn't move. Another voice said, "He's planning to leave." Shoved me awake, my coffee got cold. I forgot the 10th mop bucket in storage. I couldn't remember if I ate dinner. In the mirror, my reflection stopped blinking, then blinked twice. The world shifted, it leaned toward me, lips unmoved. Then looked at me. A searing panic settled. I sprinted to the door, only to see my reflection standing still when I moved. I barricaded the break room, shaking, mirrors all around, tables with polished surfaces, glass desk partitions, everything reflecting. The room brightened. A soft murmur echoed. The tapping grew louder, building. The voices hummed words I understood. Let me out. Let me in. Then all reflections moved, smiling as they stared at me, not mirroring. Their mouths parted, words I didn't speak, Can you feel hands on your shoulders? I gasped. I felt something behind me, cold breath. I turned. Nothing. Mirrors shattered, then cracked across the cafeteria-length wall. Shards fell. I backed into a corner, hyperventilating, flashlight flickering. They whispered now, clearer, "He followed you back." I realized this wasn't reflection. It was invasion. I fled the building at dawn, boots echoing on marble floors. I ran through empty parking lots, chest heaving, lights behind me flickered, reflections in glass walls showed someone, not me. Outside, the sunrise felt weak. I heard a soft tapping. I spun. No mirrors, no voices. But when I finally reached home and locked my bathroom door, the pouring rain drowned my comfort. I've since quit. The building, still locked, unmanned, calls me. I know those mirrors stare. Watch. And someday they'll smile when I'm not there. Now I keep blinds closed, limit outing after dark. But every time I catch a reflection in a window, phone, spoon, I catch a flicker of him, my reflection, twisted. I sometimes think, what if I bring him with me? I had been driving for nearly 6 hours straight, the kind of long haul that presses down on your eyes and weighs heavy on your soul. The sky was a bruised purple, the sun long dipped beyond the horizon, leaving nothing but the faint glow of distant stars and the occasional orange street lamp to guide my way. My name is Martin, and tonight, my only companion was the hum of the engine and the dull static playing on the radio. I was driving through a stretch of highway I thought I knew well, but the darkness had folded it into something unrecognizable, a corridor of shadows and silence. I glanced over at Bianca, my girlfriend, who was asleep in the passenger seat. Her dark hair spilled over her jacket, and her breathing was steady but quiet. She had insisted on coming with me on this trip, a weekend getaway turned late-night nightmare. Then, just past the 42-mile marker, I saw him. A figure standing by the roadside, thumb out, silhouetted against the dim glow of the mile marker's reflective sign. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe my mind playing games with exhaustion. But no, he was real. A young man, maybe early 20s, dressed in a worn-out hoodie and jeans, his face obscured by shadows. He stood completely still, just waiting. I slowed down, instinctively wanting to help, but something about him made me hesitate. The way his eyes, or what little I could see, seemed empty, almost hollow. "I don't think we should stop," I whispered to Bianca, whose eyes were still closed. He lifted his thumb, a silent plea. The rational part of me wanted to pull over, but an icy chill crept up my spine, and I found myself pressing the accelerator instead. I drove past him, but then, just a mile later, near the 43-mile marker, there he was again, standing in exactly the same pose, thumb out, waiting, like a ghost trapped in a loop. I blinked hard, questioning my sanity. "Martin," Bianca stirred. I shook my head. "There's someone on the side of the road," she frowned. "Are you sure? You've been driving too long." The hitchhiker appeared again and again at every mile marker, 44, 45, 46. No matter how fast I drove, no matter how far we went, he kept appearing, his expression unreadable, eyes never meeting mine. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. The radio suddenly crackled, the song cutting out into static. Then I heard it sobbing. A faint, distant sound coming from somewhere behind the car. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing. I tried to tell myself it was the radio or Bianca shifting in her seat, but the sobbing grew louder, raw and desperate. Suddenly, the dashboard lights flickered erratically. The radio switched channels on its own, the volume rising and falling like a heartbeat. The locks on the doors clicked, and the passenger door unlocked itself with a soft clink. Bianca's eyes shot open, panic flashing across her face. "Did you hear that?" Before I could answer, I felt it. Breathing, right behind me, shallow, labored, close enough to send ice down my spine. I whipped my head around, empty. I stared into the dark backseat. No one, but the feeling didn't go away. The sobbing, the flickering lights, the car unlocking itself. None of it made sense. "Martin, what's going on?" Bianca's voice was trembling. "I don't know," I admitted, voice barely a whisper. "Maybe we should stop," she said. I shook my head. The road stretched endlessly, a ribbon of asphalt swallowed by dark woods on either side. Stopping felt like giving in. As miles passed, the hitchhiker stopped appearing by the mile markers, but the other signs of his presence intensified. Cold drafts swept through the car. The smell of damp earth and decay filled the cabin. The sobbing turned into muffled whispers, just beyond comprehension. And every time I checked the back seat, the air grew heavier, like something unseen was pressing down on us. Then, the impossible happened. I caught movement, a shadow, a flicker of something in the corner of my eye. And when I glanced back for a full second longer than I intended, I saw him. A pale face, eyes wide and dark, just inches from mine, no words. No sound, just a cold presence. Bianca screamed. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding like a war drum. We were stopped on the side of the road, headlights slicing through the trees. I searched the backseat frantically, empty. But the cold was real. The breath was real. The terror was real. We fled, the car speeding down the highway as dawn began to break. At the first town, I pulled into a gas station, desperate to get away, desperate to forget. But the clerk's eyes told me everything I needed to know. He saw the hitchhiker too. "They never really leave," he whispered. And for the first time, I believed. Now, every time I drive alone, I check the back seat. I never want to see those eyes again. But I know, somewhere out there, the hitchhiker waits. And if you're driving alone late at night, maybe you'll see him too. The night was dragging, slow and endless, like the kind of road trip you wish you'd never started. Jonas and I had been driving for hours, the highway stretching like a black ribbon under the cold stars. The hum of the engine was the only constant, and the silence between us grew heavier as fatigue crept in. Jonas, my best friend since middle school, was behind the wheel, jaw clenched, eyes focused but tired. I was in the passenger seat, tapping my fingers nervously on my knee, glancing out the window at the dark trees blurring past. "We should stop soon," I finally said, voice low. "I need a brake and gas." Jonas nodded without turning, his voice a bit tight. "Yeah, I'm almost out." Then, like a beacon in the void, the gas station appeared. Neon lights flickering, humming faintly in the darkness, a lone sign blinking open 24 hours. It looked like a forgotten place, a relic from the 80s with peeling paint and a rickety old pump. I felt a chill settle in my stomach as we pulled in. Jonas parked under the flickering light. I grabbed my wallet and headed inside, the cold air from the open door washing over me like a wave. The gas station was small, cramped, and smelled faintly of motor oil and stale coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow over dusty shelves stocked with junk food and candy bars. Behind the counter stood the clerk, a man in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. His eyes were wide, almost wild. He looked at me with a mix of fear and urgency. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He shook his head quickly, voice barely above a whisper. "You need to leave. Now." I blinked, confused. "Excuse me," he leaned in, lowering his voice even more. "Before they get here, you don't want to be around when that happens." I glanced at Jonas through the window. He was still sitting in the car, engine idling, staring at the clerk. "Who?" I asked, heart starting to race. The clerk just shook his head, stepping back like he wanted to disappear. I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the creeping dread. "Okay, thanks for the tip." But the clerk's expression didn't change. He kept looking nervously at the dark highway behind me, where the trees swayed in an unnatural breeze. Back outside, Jonas rolled down his window. "We're leaving," he said firmly. I got in, and the car felt colder than before. As we pulled away, I caught something in the rearview mirror shapes. Dark figures standing motionless by the side of the road. They didn't move when the car passed, just watched. Jonas noticed too. "Did you see that?" I nodded, swallowing hard. The radio was crackling, but the signal was distorted, cutting in and out with strange, static-laced voices whispering words I couldn't understand. The highway seemed endless, and the trees closed in like silent sentinels. We tried to convince ourselves it was a trick of the light, fatigue playing with our minds. But every mile felt heavier. The air inside the car was thick with tension. I kept glancing in the mirror. The figures seemed to be following us, always just behind. The whispers on the radio grew louder, sometimes almost forming words. Jonas gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles white. "I think they're real," I said, voice shaking. Jonas didn't answer, eyes fixed ahead. The road twisted through an old forest, branches scraping the roof like fingers. Suddenly, the engine sputtered and died. The car coasted to a stop on the shoulder. The radio went dead. And in the silence, we heard footsteps, soft, crunching leaves all around us. I fumbled for my phone. No signal. Jonas locked the doors. We sat frozen, breaths shallow. Outside, shadows moved between the trees. A low, guttural growl echoed, sending ice down my spine. What are they?" I whispered. Jonas shook his head. "I don't know." The darkness felt alive. Something was watching us, waiting. Suddenly, the gas station clerk's words echoed in my mind. "Leave before they arrive." Who was they? And how had he known I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs were numb? Jonas started the engine, desperate. The car lurched forward behind us. A pair of glowing eyes blinked in the trees. We sped away, heart pounding. The figures disappeared into the night. Hours later, we found a town, the sun rising. But the sense of being hunted lingered. The radio crackled back to life, but now it played a strange melody, something ancient and eerie. I glanced at Jonas. We need to never stop again. And maybe never trust a gas station clerk's warning. I hated detention. That's probably the only thing I'm 100% sure of. 16 years old, too smart for some teachers, not smart enough to avoid trouble. And somehow, here I was again, stuck in this dusty old suburban high school after hours. The kind of place where every squeak echoes like a scream, and the fluorescent lights flicker like they're about to give up on life. My name's Lena. I'm sarcastic, a defense mechanism, mostly, but underneath, I'm just tired. Tired of rules, tired of teachers who don't get it, tired of feeling like the only sane person in a building full of ghosts. Tonight, I was stuck in room 213 with 3 other students. All the usual suspects. Marcus, the class clown who probably should have been here more often. Jenna, quiet and twitchy, eyes glued to her phone. And Ali, who kept muttering about ghosts and curses like he was auditioning for a horror movie. The classroom was stale, the chalkboard scratched and coated in dust. The faint scent of chalk dust mixed with old wood polish hung in the air, a smell I'd come to associate with boredom and bad decisions. We were supposed to be here until 9 p.m., but at 11:45 p.m., the janitor left, locking the main doors behind him with a final, echoing click. The school fell into a deep silence, the kind that presses on your eardrums and makes your skin crawl. I thought that was the worst part. At exactly midnight, the silence shattered. The bell rang, loud, sharp, piercing, not the usual 3 p.m. dismissal bell. This one felt wrong, like a scream from the building itself. Okay, who the hell just set off the bell? Marcus groaned, looking around the empty halls outside the classroom windows. No answer. We all froze. The flickering lights dimmed suddenly, plunging the room into shadows that danced on the walls. A cold breeze slid under the door, carrying a sharp metallic scent, like old blood mixed with chalk dust. Then came the first sound, a heavy clang. The lockers outside slammed shut one after another down the hallway, like giant hands were punching them closed. "All right, this isn't funny anymore," Jenna whispered, pulling her hoodie tighter around her head. I swallowed hard, dry throat burning, bitter panic creeping up my spine. We tried the door, locked tight. No phones, no internet, no help. The locker slams kept coming. Somewhere, faint footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate, too heavy to be human. I edged toward the window, peering into the pitch-black hall. My breath fogged up the glass. Then I saw it, a shadowy figure, tall, looming, with the unmistakable shape of a teacher's coat. Only one thing was wrong. It had no head, just an empty space where a face should have been. I blinked, shaking my head. "You guys, you see that?" Ali nodded, pale as death. "I told you. The place is haunted. It's the headless teacher." I wanted to laugh, but my voice caught in my throat. Suddenly, the chalkboard behind us scratched itself, white chalk moving over the dusty surface. I moved closer, dread filling my chest. The words "Get out" appeared, scrawled, jagged and fresh. The air thickened. My skin crawled as I touched the rough chalkboard surface, feeling the cold grit beneath my fingers. The footsteps grew louder, closer. The metallic smell sharpened. Then, the door handle rattled violently. Marcus shoved me aside, banging his fist against the door. "No way out," I muttered. A faint whisper floated from the hallway. "Stay." The lights flickered faster, shadows twisting into grotesque forms. Jenna started crying quietly. Illy whispered, "This school, it's alive. It traps you." I wanted to scream, but the words stuck in my throat. The headless figure appeared at the door, slow, deliberate. Its heavy breath fogged the window glass. We huddled together, the air icy cold. Suddenly, the bell rang again, this time louder, shriller, then silence. The figure vanished. The lockers stopped slamming. The lights stabilized. The door unlocked. We ran. Outside, dawn was breaking, the sky a pale wash of blue. I pulled out my phone, no notifications, no missed calls. The news played on a nearby TV in the convenience store window. Empty high school mystery. No staff or students found inside last night. Detention records flashed on the screen. No students assigned, no teachers scheduled. I looked back at the school. Was it real, or were we never really there? I never thought much about the apartment above mine until the noises started. The leasing office swore up and down it was vacant. The previous tenant had moved out months ago, and no one had signed a new lease since. Maintenance even came by twice to check, confirming no one was living there. But every night I hear it. The scraping of heavy chairs across wooden floors, slow and deliberate footsteps pacing back and forth, sometimes even laughter. A low, quiet laugh that makes my skin crawl. My name's George, and I work the graveyard shift at a convenience store downtown. I'm not easily spooked usually, but this is different. All started 2 weeks ago, shortly after I moved into the old brick building on 4th Street. The kind of place with creaking floorboards, dim hallways, and flickering fluorescent lights that buzz just a little too loudly. The kind of place that already has its own kind of loneliness baked into the walls. I was unpacking boxes late one night when I heard it, the unmistakable scrape of a chair being dragged across the floor. It came from directly above me. I froze, holding my breath. The apartment above was supposed to be empty. I told myself it must be some maintenance workers or movers. Maybe someone I didn't know was living there after all. But when I checked the leasing office the next day, they told me the unit had been empty for months. Probably some noise from upstairs construction, the leasing agent said, with a dismissive shrug. But there was no construction, no workers, no evidence of anyone living there. I couldn't ignore it. Every night around the same time, the clock always read 11:15 p.m. I heard it again. Footsteps pacing back and forth, slow and heavy. Then the scraping chairs. Sometimes the soft thud of furniture being moved. Once, faint laughter. That laugh echoed in my ears for hours afterward. At first, I thought it was the old pipes or the building settling. But it was too rhythmic, too intentional. Like someone was trying to get my attention. I tried talking to my friends about it, but they laughed it off. Old buildings make weird noises, they said, but it wasn't just noise. It was a presence, something that felt alive but unseen. One night, unable to take it anymore, I decided to do something crazy. I went upstairs to check for myself. I took the creaky stairs, each step echoing in the empty hallway. The door to the apartment was there, exactly where it should be, but the faded numbers looked like they hadn't been touched in months. I raised my hand and knocked 3 times. The noises stopped, silence. Then, slowly, a knock came back, one soft, deliberate rap. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced. What was this? A joke? A prank? Or something else? I called out, "Hello?" No answer. Then I heard it again. A quiet, almost deliberate scraping noise, like a chair moving slowly across the floor. I knocked again, louder this time. The door creaked. I stepped back. The knocking came again, 3 times this time, slow and rhythmic. I swear I heard breathing, shallow and uneven. I left that night with my head spinning, unsure if I'd lost my mind or if something real was happening. The next day, I told the leasing office what happened. They looked at me like I was crazy. "There's no way anyone's in there," they said firmly. "No utilities are running, no electricity." But I knew what I heard. I knew what I felt. The nights that followed grew worse. The footsteps came closer to my ceiling. The scraping turned into the sounds of furniture being dragged across the floor, right above my head. Sometimes, I could swear the pacing slowed, as if someone was standing still, listening. And the laughter, it came and went, always faint, but always there. I started to question my own sanity. Was I imagining this? Was the isolation of night shifts and a new apartment playing tricks on my mind? But then, I caught glimpses through the crack of the ceiling vents, shadows moving, flickering just out of sight. One night, I sat under my ceiling vent with a flashlight, listening. The footsteps paced slowly, then stopped right above me. Then a low voice whispered from the darkness, "George." I froze. The voice was soft but clear. Not a threat, but a call. I whispered back, "Who's there?" No answer. Just silence. The next day, I dug into the building's history. The apartment had been empty for months, yes. But before that, a man named Harold lived there. A recluse who vanished suddenly one night. No one knew where. The rumors were that Harold was into occult stuff, maybe even a bit unhinged. No one had lived there since his disappearance. That night, I heard something new, a scratching noise from above, slow and deliberate, then a soft thump. Then another, like someone or something was trying to get out. I started banging on my ceiling, shouting for help. The noises stopped again. But as I listened, the knocking came back. 1, 2, 3 knocks. Then a soft scrape as if the door upstairs was slowly being unlocked. I called the police. They came, searched the empty apartment, nothing, no signs of recent habitation, no footprints, no furniture moved. Just old dust and silence. I was alone with my fears. Every night, the sounds came back until one night I heard footsteps on my own floor. Slow, heavy steps pacing outside my door. I opened it, no one there, but on the floor, a single chair leg mark, fresh and deep in the dust. I'm still here. Still hearing the furniture moving above me. Still hearing the laughter. Still hearing my name whispered from the darkness. And I'm not sure if I'm the one being watched now.